I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas. It was a great way to grow up, for sure. The adults are like, kids go outside, and so we just played in the barn where there's like big tractors and stuff. It was really fun. And my parents were married for about 3 years, and they got divorced. So my mom was pretty much a single mom, and she moved us around a lot.
As a boy, Brian Cargill's life is in constant motion.
I ended up going to probably 6 different elementary schools, probably 5 or 6 different junior highs, and 3 different high schools. It was pretty unstable most of the time.
Brian vows to build a secure future for himself. And when he graduates high school, he sets his sights on architecture.
I've always been very interested in buildings and structures and things like that. It just came so naturally to me. So by the time I got to graduation time, I already knew that I was going to go to architecture school.
By 1993, Brian is a 28-year-old architect living in Dallas. He's happily married, or so he thinks.
After a couple of years, my wife decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. And so I was just kind of left reeling. It was a big shock for me. At that point, my dreams had pretty much crumbled, and I was in an extremely vulnerable state. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was just so distraught over this loss of kind of this idea of the nuclear family. That just seemed like all I could think about.
9 months after the divorce is finalized, one of Brian's friends sets him up on a blind date.
He described her as very beautiful and very vivacious and intelligent, and he thought that we would be a good match.
Kimberly West is a 27-year-old receptionist.
We met, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. She was really beautiful and just a very charismatic personality. She had just gotten divorced. She was in a custody situation with her ex. And so we kind of had some things in common. You know, we really hit it off.
Over the next several weeks, Brian and Kimberly start talking on the phone every day.
I felt like, oh, she really gets me. That she heard me, that she identified with me in a way that certainly my ex-wife had not done at all. It felt very romantic and just exciting. So it was great. Our second date was at a divorce support group at a church. And I got there a little early, and she was running late. Instead of waiting outside, I decided to just go ahead and go in. And so I sat down, and I kind of saved her a chair next to me. She finally came in, and she looked straight at me and kind of gave me a mean look. She sat in a different chair across the group from me. And so I was very kind of mystified as to, what was going on. After that, she really was mad at me because I had gone in ahead of her. She said, "This is my support group. You're my guest." She's like really kind of disproportionately angry about that. Then, just out of nowhere, she just held me back. It was kind of getting a little passionate. And then she just said, "I have to leave now." The whole thing left me feeling, this is a little weird. That whole second date was just strange.
As unnerving as the experience is, the next time Kimberly and Brian see each other, she acts as if nothing happened.
It started getting much more passionate. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and it was very powerful, and it was one that I'd not really experienced to that degree up until that point in my life. Kimberly was able to stir these feelings, in me, the passionate feelings, both physically and emotionally. I feel like I started falling in love with her pretty quickly, just because I did feel like this immediate, really strong connection.
Kimberly seems to be feeling the same way, because she treats Brian like he is a close, trusted companion.
Kimberly has a court date with her ex-husband. and he's going for full custody.
She wanted me to testify in court for her as a character witness. And at this point, I had known her for maybe 2 months. So I went to the courthouse with her, and when she was in the hearing, one of her friends gave me a copy of her psychological report. I read through the report, but so much of it, I didn't know what to make of it. Like, it had a lot of psychological terms that I wasn't familiar with, such as narcissism and borderline personality disorder.
Now, borderline personality disorder, that's the mother of all disorders. That's everything combined into one.
And individuals with borderline personality disorder have affective instability. They have emotions that are unstable. This is somebody who is highly impulsive, dramatic, has an intense fear of abandonment, and furthermore expresses typically some type of violence. It can be verbal aggression, physical aggression.
I was very conflicted about the whole report and wasn't sure what to make of it. She told me that her husband paid off psychologists to make fabricated psychological reports. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this is a professional psychologist, and they don't just fabricate reports. And so I thought there was something there that I needed to be careful about.
The judge rules against Kimberly, and she is devastated. Brian feels for her and doesn't question her about the report.
I didn't want to have another failed relationship. In my previous marriage, I didn't get to fight for that relationship at all. So I didn't want to just walk away from the relationship, but kind of fight for it and do the best I possibly could to make it work.
The couple continue to see each other but live separately. Brian walks on eggshells to avoid Kimberly's bad temper.
If I said anything at all positive about my ex-wife, she would often jump all over that and say something pretty mean and nasty about her. Kimberly would often try to undermine my relationship with my ex-wife because she felt like it was threatening her relationship with me. Kimberly always could escalate, just acted very aggressively.
Really, what you have here is a powder keg. She's always exploding in this fit of rage if she doesn't get her way. She screams, she yells, it's my way or no way.
That was making me very unhappy. I started feeling that, okay, I don't think I need to be in this relationship. This relationship is starting to be something that's negative for me.
5 months into the relationship, Brian is ready to make a clean break.
We just had one fight too many, and I had finally solidified my resolve that I was going to break up. So I knew I was going to have this conversation with her. I'd kind of prepared for it mentally. I don't care what she says, I'm done with this. I was actually feeling pretty good about it. I was feeling a little bit of a sense of relief that I had kind of dodged a bullet. Okay, I'm going to put this behind me, just move on. I was about to say, all right, I'm done with this. I'm not seeing you anymore. Don't call me, etc. And that's when she told me she was pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
I felt like I was at the beginning of a horrible, horrible journey.
Just as Brian Cargill is about to break up with his girlfriend Kimberly, she tells him she is pregnant.
In that moment, my entire body just dropped, and it felt like kind of falling over a cliff. It's this flush of dread that just completely fills you and overwhelms you. But my first thought was, okay, we're gonna make this work. We're gonna take this curveball and we're gonna hit it out of the park. I mean, I'm not gonna walk away from a woman that is carrying my child. I'm just not gonna do that. And so I did propose to her the idea that, I will stick by you during the pregnancy. I want to be a part of the child's life no matter what, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be married to do that. And she put it to me very plainly.
You'll never see me again.
If you don't marry me, you're not having anything to do with this child. Period.
It is the ultimate blackmail. Guess what? I'm pregnant. And now you're stuck. anything is possible with this woman. She'll do anything.
I felt like I'd put myself in a situation where I didn't really have a lot of a choice. The value of being a parent had to trump really everything else. A couple days later, we went out and had a nice little engagement dinner. In that moment, I tried to get as much out of it as I could, get as much joy and celebration as I could, and kind of leave the other stuff behind. And even though it wasn't going to be as pure as I wanted originally, still could be something.
The fact that he stays with her after all of this is a huge testament to his character. But it also tells her, I can do anything I want to this guy. And you know what? He's gonna stick around. Why? Because he has a conscience. She doesn't.
In June of 1994, Brian and Kimberly have a small, intimate wedding in New Mexico.
We had a little wedding at my mom's house, and I tried to maintain an air of kind of celebration and that I was happy about it and everything, but deep inside, I was really scared and just dreading kind of what was to come. To the point where right after the ceremony, I kind of went in the back of the house and just kind of had a good cry and just kind of let out so many of these emotions that I was having there.
The couple move in together, and a few months later in November, Kimberly gives birth to their son, Jamie.
After Jamie was born, I was jubilant. And so it was kind of a nice period of time. It was pretty calm, relatively peaceful. I felt a sense of relief that maybe this was gonna start to be okay. Maybe we can make this work. But then things really kind of went downhill. I remember one time I had gone into the bedroom and locked the bedroom door because I was trying to kind of get away from her. So she started like kicking the door. And so I was like, okay, this is not good. So I opened the door and I walked out. And then this hammer comes just whizzes by my head and sticks into the wall. And I turned around and I looked at her, and she had kind of this wild look in her eyes.
The hammer lodges itself in the wall, and what does she do? She leaves it there. She tells him, don't you touch that hammer. Why? She wants to remind him, if you don't do what I say, there's gonna be a price.
And I just remember just this horrible feeling just washed over me about, man, what am I doing? How am I ever gonna like get through this? It was just definitely just the low point in my life.
Kimberly's violent streak is only just beginning.
We were sitting in a car and she got angry with me because of a conversation we were having, and she, with her fist, just punched me as hard as she could in the face. It was just such a shock that I just said, I'm done. That punch in the face was really just the final straw. I just got out of the car and I left and never went back.
Brian immediately files for divorce from Kimberly. Over the following months, the battle for custody of his son becomes emotional warfare, with Kimberly pulling out all the stops to make Brian's life miserable.
Brian, this is Kimberly. I'm sick of being hung up on. The only reason why I tried you at 7:45 at work is because I had been trying your other number since last night.
So at this point, she was not working at all. And she would call me all the time. At some point, I started creating a phone log all the times that she'd called me. I counted one day, like literally 50 times she called me at work.
I'm just disgusted with your treatment of me. I'm disgusted with your ulterior motives.
She would call and I would say, I'm busy. And then she would start threatening the receptionist. It was just insanity. Eventually, I decided to leave my first job just because she had called me at work so many times. But I was giving her basically all my money. I was still paying her rent and like giving her probably 75% of my paycheck every month. That was a tough time.
Brian can't afford a lawyer and sees Jamie at Kimberly's whim during the divorce process. When the dust settles in 1995, he gets shared custody of Jamie, but Kimberly continues to make life difficult.
She would kind of do a bait and switch in terms of visitation with my son.
I'm not keeping him from you, but I'm not going to allow him to go off overnight until several matters are mediated.
That was the big thing, was I was always at her mercy when I could see him. One time, she got really mad at me and decided I wasn't going to see Jamie anymore, ever. I showed up at her house, and she wouldn't give him to me.
It doesn't make any sense why you would drive all the way out here knowing that I'm not going to turn Jamie over.
Another time, I came anyway, even though she said she wasn't going to let me have him, and then she just let me have him. So she just liked to play games with the visitation.
It's a tough blow for Brian.
I loved my son before he was born. To see him and spend time with him, it's almost like a spiritual, you know what that connection is like.
Really, the only hold that she has over Brian now is the child, but that's a huge piece of leverage. She has a piece of Brian's heart. She knows the guy is a caring individual and that he loves his child. So she is totally using this child to manipulate the guy.
Over the years, Jamie pays a steep price for being Brian's son.
I was concerned. A lot of times he would call me asking me for help. He would tell me things that were alarming. Like, she started screaming at me, and so I ran out the door and ran down the street to someone's phone to call.
Hey, Daddy, it's me.
Those kinds of calls are gut-wrenching. I was really scared for him.
When he's just 11 years old, Jamie makes a chilling confession to Brian.
They had this big physical conflict. She put a belt around his neck.
She wraps a belt and drags the kid around the room. Let me drag him around the room, cut off his oxygen to let him know who the boss is. Could it get any more violent than that?
Jamie was at a point where he thought he was going to be strangled. He thought that his life was going to end. So it was a dramatic escalation in violence.
Sorry. I saw outright abuse that leaves bruises, marks. I was horrified. What parent wouldn't be horrified to see their child injured?
When Brian hears about this, that's it. He's got to take that kid out of that house. He has to. When you look at all of this building up, what is she gonna do next? What's left? Murder?
Brian Cargill has just found out that his 11-year-old son has been physically abused by his ex-wife, Kimberly.
I finally had evidence, like hardcore, irrefutable evidence that I could take to a judge and make some progress. I took photographs of the abuse and then immediately went to an attorney.
Brian reports Kimberly to Child Protective Services, providing them with proof of her abuse. And 10 years after the divorce in 2006, he finally gains full custody of Jamie.
It was a positive step for sure. At least now I had some sense of stability with my son.
But shockingly, the courts still allow Kimberly unsupervised visitation.
He would go to her house every other weekend. And there was always that worry for him.
With the system failing his son, Brian remains vigilant and keeps a watchful eye on Kimberly. But soon, he finds a measure of peace after meeting a woman worthy of his love.
We met and kind of hit it off, and after that, that was it. It's like we didn't really date anyone else. From our first date, we're pretty much, okay, this is it. I knew that she would make my life better. She is truly like the most emotionally stable person I know. So for me, that was a big, as you can imagine, that was a big priority.
Kimberly moves on with her life as well. She goes to nursing school and marries another man. They have a son.
Happy first birthday. We love you, Keith, Jill, Madeline, and Hayes.
But it doesn't last. Soon, Kimberly is divorced and engaged in yet another custody battle. This time, it will turn deadly. The trouble begins when she decides to hire a babysitter for her 4-year-old son while she's at work as a licensed nurse.
A friend of hers mentions a woman, Cherry Walker, in an apartment building not far from where she lives. By all accounts, she's just this wonderful, warm, 39-year-old woman.
Cherry was described as a very friendly, agreeable individual who had an interest in babysitting. Cherry had an IQ of 56, so this is profoundly developmentally disabled. So she was operating at a 6th grade level. So someone who could arguably be very easily manipulated.
She's living in an apartment by herself for the first time in her life. She has an aide that visits her at the apartment to make sure she's doing okay. And in walks Kimberly Cargill. The devil walks into Cherry Walker's life. And it's never going to be the same again.
Cherry is unable to say no to Kimberly, who takes advantage of her kindness.
Kimberly would drop the son off at Cherry's apartment and just leave him there for hours, come back super late or the next morning to pick him up. Cherry was on a very fixed income given her disability. She relied on food stamps to buy food for herself. And so she had this little boy at her house who would be dropped off hungry. Kimberly didn't leave any money for food, so Cherry would share hers.
Kimberly found someone she could exploit at will. Hey, can I drop the kid off for 2 hours? She'd come back 8 hours later. Or she'd drop the child off and maybe not show up for 2-3 days.
Thanks a lot for
She knew that Cherry Walker really wasn't going to say anything about this, that she could just continually do this over and over and over again.
The boy's father accuses Kimberly of abusing their son.
Kimberly Cargill's child is being abused, and social services gets involved, and they open an investigation against her.
In March of 2010, Child Protective Services removes Kimberly's son from her home. A custody hearing is ordered, and Cherry Walker is unwittingly caught up in the legal battle.
The court subpoena Cherry Walker to testify in court against Kimberly Cargill.
Cherry receives a subpoena as a frequent caretaker of the little boy. Immediately, Kimberly becomes concerned because if Cherry Walker is taking the stand in court, it'll become quickly evident that Kimberly's really not fit to be caring for a young child.
I think that Kimberly was specifically worried about Cherry's testimony because Cherry was probably going to say something truthful, saying that she was a bad mother and violent.
Cherry's taking care of that child. She had seen the abuse and the neglect that Kimberly Cargill perpetrated against that child. She was really the best witness.
I think that Kimberly believed everything was riding on this particular hearing. This was the last son she had custody of. This was her last hope to prove that she was a competent mother. This was her last chance.
Kimberly's first reaction is to just blow up Cherry Walker's phone. She actually calls her over 70 times, so she's panicking.
Cherry is not the only person who Kimberly is frantically calling. On June 18, 2010, just 5 days before Kimberly's custody hearing is set to begin, she phones her ex, Brian.
I was on the way out of town with my wife going on a long weekend, and Kimberly called me. I saw it was her and I didn't answer. She left a message on my voicemail. It was a bit frantic. Have you been subpoenaed? What are you going to tell them if they subpoena you? It was a little strange, but I just kind of disregarded it. Kimberly was really the last person that I wanted to hear from.
The next day, on June 19th, a driver on a small country road makes a tragic discovery.
This young guy is out delivering pizza. He's driving down the road and he realizes he went past the address, so he has to do a turnaround. He heads into this gravel area where it's an open field, and then he looks and he sees what appears to be a body. So of course, he dials 911, and in come the crime scene guys.
Investigators rush to the scene.
They find a woman face down, and it appears that she had been burned. Her body has been charred. Her skin is actually peeling off. It's been burned so badly. And in between her legs, they find this empty creamer container. It's not burned. They also determine that the victim has not been there long, probably within 24 hours.
Investigators determined that this person likely died of homicidal violence because this body was so badly burned, they couldn't identify who it was.
Detectives can't find an ID anywhere near the body, so they put out a media alert in hopes of getting any information on their Jane Doe. Across town, Guthrie and Rowan Walker, a pastor and his wife, reach out to police. Their beloved daughter has been missing for 24 hours.
This is a daughter who is constantly in touch with them. There's not maybe 4 hours that go by that they don't know where she is. Nobody has seen her. And there's one thing their daughter never does, and that is miss church. But on this day, she never shows up. And this is when they begin to realize something's drastically wrong here. So where is she? A media report goes out of this victim that's found, and they just know in their heart and their soul that it's her. So they go to the police, and sure enough, it's their daughter, Cherry Walker.
Smith County sheriffs have identified a burned female victim as Cherry Walker by using her dental records. Brian Cargill finds out about Cherry's murder when he gets a call from Kimberly's mother.
It kind of blew me away. It was pretty surreal. And I immediately kind of made the connection with Kimberly. Maybe she had something to do with this. Jamie and I went into hiding immediately. It was surreal for sure. I never imagined that I would be in that kind of a situation where I'd be afraid that someone was gonna come and attack us. It was a scary thought, that maybe she had gotten into this manic state and was ready to come out and kill everyone she knew.
Investigators conduct a search of Cherry Walker's apartment, looking for leads.
They're looking around, and they discover several voicemails. They're from a woman named Kim, who says, "Hey, Cherry, I have to talk to you." And she sounds a bit frantic.
Cell phone records also showed that this number had called Cherry over and over and over and over. There were dozens upon dozens of phone calls to Cherry Walker the day before she went missing.
So investigators immediately need to find out, who is this Kim? They interview Cherry Walker's aide, and they ask her, "Do you know anybody named Kim?" "Oh yeah, I know somebody named Kim. That's Kimberly Cargill." So now they're getting somewhere.
Cherry's caregiver was one of the last people to see her before she went missing, and during the course of questioning her, police learn about the situation with Kimberly Cargill, the babysitting arrangement, the subpoena, and the child custody hearing. She says Kimberly told Cherry not to go to court, to ignore the subpoena, but Cherry wanted to follow the rules. She was really concerned about getting in trouble.
She's scared. Kimberly is blowing up Cherry's phone, calling, and she wants to meet with Cherry to discuss the situation.
In Cherry's last conversation with the caregiver, Cherry says Kimberly is going to come over, she's going to take me out to dinner, and Cherry's caregiver tells her, do not go, lock the door, go to bed, do not answer if Kimberly comes to your house, and don't go anywhere with her.
She goes, listen, ignore Kim, get some sleep, and tomorrow we'll deal with all of this. But for Cherry Walker, tomorrow never comes. The aide never sees her again.
Investigators head directly to Kimberly's house to speak with her.
She comes to the door and they say, hey, listen, we want to talk to you about Cherry Walker. And she says, I don't think I should talk to you without my lawyer. That's a red flag. If you're a friend of this woman's, why wouldn't you want to talk to us?
Kimberly maintained her arrogant disposition the whole way. The police wanted to search the house, and Kimberly would not permit them.
So investigators park down the street. They sit in their car, and they wait for Kim Cargill to leave. She leaves. She starts driving. Kimberly is really frantic. She's totally out of her mind. And she blows through a stop sign. So they pull her over. And immediately, what do they notice in her car? One of those creamer containers. And what do they have at their crime scene where Cherry Walker was dumped? They have that same empty container of creamer. So there's a connection. They seize her car, and they tow that car to forensics.
While the forensics team searches Kimberly's car for evidence, police execute a search warrant for her home.
Investigators made note that the house was messy. There were dirty clothes, trash everywhere, pieces of food on the floor, used takeout, fast food containers, trash in the bathtub. It was very unclean and disarray.
And then they go into the laundry room. They see laundry piled up from probably weeks. But in the washing machine, there's one sheet. Kim Cargill was washing one sheet? Question mark. Why? At the crime scene, they found these tire tracks, and those match perfectly to Kimberly Cargill's vehicle. They also find that Kimberly's DNA matches the DNA found on the coffee creamer container found between Cherry Walker's legs. They have now connected Kimberly Cargill to the murder scene and to the body. She is arrested, and they charge her with capital felony murder. She's dead to rights. There's no doubt in their mind that Kimberly Cargill murdered Cherry Walker.
Kimberly Cargill has been arrested and charged in the brutal murder of her son's babysitter, 39-year-old Cherry Walker.
It was a big relief when she was arrested. We all kind of were able to breathe a little better, sleep a little bit better at night. There was really not a doubt in my mind that she was guilty.
In May of 2012, Kimberly's case goes to trial in Smith County. By this time, and much to Brian's relief, Kimberly has had minimal contact with her son, Jamie.
As a prosecutor, I believe she killed Cherry Walker, and I wanted to get justice for Cherry. I believed in the evidence. When you have an item with the DNA sample, that belongs to Kim Cargill, and Kim Cargill knows Cherry Walker, and Cherry Walker was going to be picked up by her that night. You know, it's not hard to put two and two together on this. You just dumped a body, killed someone and dumped a body, and set it on fire.
It appears that Kimberly Cargill strangled Cherry Walker inside her house, wrapped her in a sheet, took her out into that field by the road, untangled her from the sheet, poured some sort of accelerant on her, and lit her on fire to cover up forensic evidence.
She killed her. She dumped her body and burned it so she wouldn't get caught. It all supports everything that common sense tells you. That Kim didn't want Cherry to testify. She didn't want her to go to that hearing because she felt like it was going to be a problem. And then all of a sudden, Cherry's dead. So, you know, it all fits.
Kimberly takes the stand in her own defense and pleads not guilty.
Her defense was that she was there when Cherry Walker died, but she did not kill her. She said that she took Cherry out to dinner to talk about the whole situation.
She says she's driving down the road and Cherry Walker had a seizure and that she could not save her or revive her from it. She died.
She said she drove around in a panic, dumped the body into a field, and burned it because she was afraid, even though she said she didn't kill her, she would get blamed for it, so she tried to dispose of the body.
There's a point where Kimberly's behavior kind of borders on delusional. She was supremely confident in her ability to escape responsibility, to manipulate. She thinks that the jury is going to look at this excuse and say, oh, that makes sense. You know, your friend dies, so you set them on fire and dump their body.
Brian Cargill is called as a witness for the prosecution.
When I was in court testifying and on the stand, I did not want to look at her. I was aware of her, but I never really looked her in the eye. I just had no need for that. You know, what she had done was horrible. She took someone else's life, which is hard to even really fathom.
The jury quickly comes back with a verdict.
We, the jury, found the defendant, Kimberly Cargill, guilty of the offense of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
The verdict came in, I felt relieved that Kim had been held accountable for what she did.
Kimberly Cargill is found guilty on all counts of capital felony murder, and they vote for the death penalty.
It didn't surprise me at all that she would get the death penalty. She took advantage of Cherry to that degree and then turned around and killed her. I mean, that's just outrageous. It really is outrageous.
In the aftermath of the sentencing, those who knew Kimberly are left wondering how she could have committed such a heinous act.
That always stuck out to me, that we had this spectrum of goodness and kindness and a sweet person cross paths with everything that was bad and evil. Kim was someone who had no empathy for others, no feelings of regret or remorse for anything she did.
Kimberly was nothing but a menace who abused Brian and abused her children. I think she is one of the most vindictive, violent female psychopaths ever. Brian Cargill should consider himself lucky, and he should count his blessings because he was sleeping with the devil. Only the devil decided not to kill him, but to kill somebody else.
Even though she met a tragic end, Cherry's light will never be forgotten.
When the trial concluded, there was a photo in evidence of Cherry. She was smiling, she was happy. I printed that photo, I put it in a frame. I wanted that photo in my office to remember as a prosecutor why you do it. Her father told me that I never thought lawyers or law enforcement would care about a mentally handicapped black woman. It hurt me that he had to carry that with him. It broke my heart. I was very proud that we were able to get justice for her, show him that we did care deeply for your daughter. She was a beautiful woman. We fought hard for her, and now Kim will be held accountable for what she did.
As for Brian, he's moved on from the turmoil and found a silver lining in his life.
You know, they say time heals all wounds. It's a cliche, but I think every single day heals a little bit more. My kids have really taught me kind of how to love, if you will. Jamie, he's doing much better now. He's a chef. He's got a good job, and he's adulting, which is what we raise him for. We live in a household of 5, my wife and I, and 3 dogs. It's great. I mean, I don't have any complaints. We're able to live life pretty stress-free and, you know, do what we want to do. And so, you know, feel pretty good.
The night begins with a hum that never stops, cicadas, neon, boat engines idling against the tide, and then the radio cracks like lightning. A name, a mile marker, a car abandoned with the driver door ajar, a purse full of tips from the dinner shift. It's a Florida Keys Friday, July of 1995, warm air like a hand over the mouth. Somewhere past the 7-mile bridge, where the highway becomes a ribbon laid across black water, a young woman vanishes between a parking lot floodlight and the horizon. People swear they saw her crossing to the marina. People swear they heard a scream swallowed by wind. What the police see is a set of footprints, the faint drag of a heel, and then nothing but mangrove shadows breathing. The camera of the mind pushes in. Salt-crusted patrol cars, red-blue halos staining the palms. An officer taps a flashlight against his palm. The beam stutters, then holds. It climbs over a styrofoam bait box, a shattered beer bottle, a smear on the curb that might be rust, might be blood, might be the memory of either. Her name tag, Alyssa, sits face down on the painted line, cracked right through the Y. A gull drags a french fry across the asphalt like chalk. Far out, the water lifts and lowers, indifferent. The tide schedule says it's running out to the Atlantic. The detectives look at each other and think the same thought. If she went in, the ocean takes everything it wants. News breaks like a siren in the morning. Mysterious disappearance, shocked community, cold case brewing in real time. Reporters stand at the marina and let the wind do half the talking. The chef from her diner stares past the lens and says she left at 11:07 p.m., counting the bills twice because the drawer came up short earlier. A fisherman says he saw a pickup with a busted taillight inching along, stopping, inching, like it was following someone on foot. A bartender across the way says she heard a voice, low and coaxing, "You need a ride?" Her mother, in a t-shirt she slept in, folds and unfolds a paper napkin until it's only lint and says Alyssa hated rides. She trusted her feet. She trusted the straight line of US 1 glowing like a runway. Detectives pull threads until their fingers burn. They check the boyfriend, a dive instructor with wrists tattooed in coral, who says he was doing a night charter, logged by tourists with sunburn and disposable cameras. The alibi floats. They check a drifter, too many aliases, not enough toothbrushes, who was seen sleeping under a seaside pavilion and vanished the same week. They enter a storage locker that smells like wet rope and gasoline. They find a damp sweatshirt that might be hers. They find a hair that might be hers. They find hope that might be theirs. The lab says contamination, inconclusive, try again. The clock says move. Cue the aerial shots. Search grids mapped on water with orange buoys. Dive flags nipping at the breeze. Sheriff's boats combing the flats. Helicopters bite at the heat. The mangroves stand shoulder to shoulder like witnesses who refuse eye contact. A tip line rings with everything South Florida knows how to invent. A cult on a liveaboard schooner. A smuggling route through the backcountry. A jealous co-worker with keys to a freezer. Each story comes with a face that looks almost right. A motive that almost sings, and then it drowns. Days turn to weeks. Local papers write about hurricanes with the same verbs they used for Alyssa: approach, strike, vanish. Her friends tape flyers to every guardrail from Key Largo to Key West. The sun bleaches her photo until the whites of her eyes become the sky. Years do what years do. They quietly sand the edges off grief. The case file grows heavy and then settles like a sleeping animal on a shelf. New storms take new names. Motels repaint. Tourists learn where not to park at high tide. Detectives transfer, retire, die, get plaques, get forgotten. But the box stays. Inside the box, a hair with no story left in it. A plastic comb, Polaroids of tire tracks turning into black parentheses, 3 cigarette butts swept from the curb the morning after. The butts sit in a paper envelope with handwriting gone to silver. No one throws them away. No one can. The keys remember in objects. And then the hinge of it, a phone rings in a different decade, a different building. The caller ID is the quiet revolution no one could have predicted in 1995. A lab upstate has a new machine, a new method, a way to coax whispers from old air. Send what you've got, the voice says, like a fisherman asking for yesterday's bait. The box wakes up, dust scrambles. Evidence lines a table under harsh fluorescent lights. A tech lifts the paper envelope like a communion. The cigarettes go into a vault of numbers and heat and patience. Weeks later, there is a name the case has never said out loud. Not a confession, not a witness. A genetic breadcrumb, familial DNA, linking a cousin to a cluster of surnames living and dead across the peninsula like islands. Detectives knock on doors that have forgotten them. They find a man whose life has been the sound of engines. Turns out he was a marine mechanic then, a charter captain sometimes, the guy you called when your boat coughed salt and wouldn't start. He knows the marina like a confidant knows a confession. He lived in a trailer that faced the water, where headlights drifted like fish at night. He smoked a brand with a gold ring around the filter. He had a pickup with a taillight he fixed with red tape. He had a way of talking that made you nod before you understood. His name lands with a thud on the desk. His face looks like every face you didn't notice in 1995. The detectives sit with him at a laminated table patterned like fake wood and say they want to talk about a girl. He smiles like tide pulling off a sandbar. He asks for a lawyer. He asks for water. He asks what took them so long. The room is small and the air is thick and no one blinks. They slide a photo across. He glances, half a heartbeat, and sets his jaw like a dock piling in a storm. He says he doesn't remember that summer, not that night, not that girl. He says he helped everyone who asked. That was his job. He says he smoked yesterdays he can't count. The detectives change rhythm. They talk about the butts on the curb, the familial DNA, the cousin who gave a sample for an unrelated reason, a traffic thing. They talk about fate like it's paperwork. He doesn't move. The AC ticks. Outside, the sunlight is loud. Inside, time is a knot. Arrest comes at dawn, as it should in stories like this. Blue shirts at the trailer door. A dog barking until its only breath. Neighbors with coffee mugs pretending not to watch. Phones up anyway. Florida Keys, 1995, cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. The headline writes itself, loud and merciless. The handcuffs flash in the sunrise like fish scales. He goes to the car without a fight. He says nothing. He says everything, because silence in a moment like this speaks all the way to Key Largo. The sheriff stands at the microphone and calls it closure. The mother stands at the front row and calls it a beginning. Reporters ask if there is a body. The answer is the ocean. Reporters ask if there is a weapon. The answer is time. Reporters ask why it took 30 years. The answer is a machine that didn't exist when she vanished, and a cigarette butt too stubborn to disintegrate. Court is a different ocean with different currents. You can drown in procedure. The state sketches a path. Alyssa leaves her shift. He offers a ride. The pickup shadows her until the parking lot loses witnesses. The pickup door opens and closes, and then the night takes the rest. No body. They have cases without bodies. No direct DNA. They have familial threads tied to the cigarettes the morning after. No confession. They have a pattern. People who worked with him recall late-night boat trips. A temper, the way he watched. A waitress says he always sat with his back to the wall. A deckhand says he scrubbed the deck too long one morning, bleach burning the air. The defense shrugs against the tide. Memory is a liar. The ocean eats evidence. Key's gossip can make a man out of a myth and a monster out of a man. They say he's a scapegoat for a story the island couldn't bear. The jury listens the way islands listen to storms. They sit through tides of testimony, logbooks on the table, maps unfurled, experts pointing at arrows that pretend to know where currents carry guilt. The mother testifies like a lighthouse, steady, shining. She speaks of an empty bedroom that still smells like coconut shampoo when the weather turns. She says she kept Alyssa's shoes by the door because you never know. The room holds its breath. The accused looks down, always down, and taps two fingers together as if counting seconds. The judge's gavel is the sound of rope slapped against a dock. And then the verdict. It comes like squall lines. Guilty. The word is a boom that rattles the fixtures. Reporters sprint to phones. The mother puts her face in her hands and disappears into her own weather and then resurfaces, gasping. A different woman. The sheriff calls it justice served across decades of heat. The state attorney calls it a triumph of science. Cameras do what cameras do. Find the teardrop. Magnify it into a narrative. Cold case solved. The lower third declares, neat as a postcard. There's applause in the back hallway, and in the hallway after that there is only echo. But the keys keep secrets like charts keep reefs, hidden and hungry. Night falls and the water leans in. Locals argue under the slow blades of ceiling fans. Some say he did it, end of story. Some say the defense was right. No body, no weapon, no direct DNA, and the state rode a current of need. In a bar whose floorboards remember boot prints from the 70s, someone says they heard a different man brag once, drunk, about a girl in a skiff and a place where the mangroves knit so tight even light can't get through. In a tackle shop, someone points to a cove on a map with a knuckle and says currents push east that time of year, not west, and that changes everything. A retired cop says he still dreams of drag marks that end in clean concrete. A young detective, not yet born in 1995, promises he'll keep looking for a body because closure without answers is just a pause. The mother doesn't sleep much. She walks the shoreline at dawn, the hour when pelicans decide and boats choose directions. She talks to Alyssa the way you talk to the ocean, steady, patient, never expecting it to talk back. She thanks the scientists, the detectives, the stubborn piece of paper with 3 old cigarettes inside. She thanks the jurors who listened until the word made sense. And then she asks the waves the only question that matters: where? The tide strokes the sand like a secret written, erased, written, erased. She is not a woman who believes in ghosts. She is a woman who believes in shoes by the door. Tourists keep coming. Highway 1 keeps laying itself down over the water every morning. The marina where Alyssa vanished now sells a t-shirt that says "Remember" in an alphabet of rope. Young waitresses count their tips under the same neon and keep their keys like talismans between their fingers. A detective who spent years on the case drives home slow one night, windows down, and thinks about the cigarettes. A casual habit no one could have guessed would be a lighthouse 3 decades later. He thinks about how the smallest trash becomes the loudest witness. He thinks about how justice is often a voice through a wall, muffled but there. He passes the mile marker and doesn't look because some places are already permanent in the corner of the eye. The man in the cell ages the way boats rust, 1 flake at a time, in places people don't notice until they're the only thing left. He tells himself a story in which he is unlucky, misunderstood, a pawn of a hungry headline. He tells himself a story in which he is exactly what they say he is. The stories fight in the dark. Some nights he can hear the water like traffic, and it keeps him awake. And he hates it because it sounds like the life he wanted. Engines, docks, laughter thrown across water like a rope. Some nights he dreams of bleach and wakes with his tongue bitter. No one visits. His cousin doesn't answer letters. The gold ring on the cigarette filter has bitten him at last. And still, there is the place, the dot on the map, the parking lot light that flickers, the drag of a heel, the lullaby of tires over bridge joints, the mangrove breath. There is the night that swallowed a girl and held its mouth closed for 30 years, then finally exhaled a name into a lab's fluorescent morning. There is the verdict that built a wall around a story but could not roof it. There is the ocean, which holds what it holds and hums what it hums, and sometimes, very rarely, gives a single thing back. We say solved because we cannot live forever with the word missing. We say solved because the world needs sharp edges and endings that click. But the keys shrug, the way islands do, and keep rocking on their limestone spines. Somewhere out there, past the pilings, past the lantern glare, a shape moves under the surface and becomes the surface and is gone. So listen, if you ever drive south at night, past the places where the highway is a thin thought and the guardrail is faith, roll your windows down, hear the low note the water keeps, smell diesel, hot tar, wet rope, glance at the mile markers without letting them catch your eyes, and when the radio crackles with a voice you don't know saying a name, a time, a request for anyone who saw anything, pull over if you must and breathe until the hum returns. On the islands, memory is a tide. It goes out, it comes back, it leaves a lipstick, a comb, 3 cigarette butts in a paper envelope that refuses to disappear. We call it evidence, we call it fate, we call it a line finally drawn straight across water. And yet, in the hush that follows the headline, the sea keeps talking, and the story never quite stops. The thing about an arrest is that it changes the volume, not the song. For a week, the island is sirens, microphones, flashing red on wet asphalt, and then the sound drops to a whisper only the locals hear. A waitress stacks coffee cups in pairs like matched shells and asks the busboy if he knew him, the mechanic with the pickup, and the boy shrugs because everyone knew him and also no one did. At the diner, they keep Alyssa's old name tag in the register like a coin that buys a story. The cook says the jury got it right. The bartender says the jury got it fast. The manager says business spikes 2 days after every tragedy. That's just how humans are. In the corner, a reporter from upstate scribbles in a notebook as if the pencil can scoop water. Inside the sheriff's office, there's the aftercare of a storm. Temporary desks folded, portable lights rolled away like spare suns. The evidence board is stripped, thumbtacks rattling in a paper cup, yarn curled like seagrass in a trash bin. A younger detective, moon pale under the tan, hair clipped close as a crew cut in a training manual, carries the wrong box to records and is sent back with a laugh. He opens the file one last time because superstition says you thank the paper. Photographs stare up with their permanent squint, the parking lot, the comb, the cigarettes. He taps the envelope with the butts, two soft knuckles like you knock on wood. Then he notices a notation on the chain of custody form, an old hand's cursive, 3 items sealed, then checked out, then 2 returned for testing, 3rd returned later by different deputy. Initials blurred by sun and time. He reads it twice. He reads it again and feels not panic, not guilt, just a small draft in a sealed room. He finds the archival scanner humming in a corner and feeds the form through. The pixels sharpen the ghosted initials until they turn from fog to letters. Not the deputy he expected. Not a deputy, in fact. A temp hired during hurricane cleanup in '98, a name that never made it to a pension plaque. He writes the letters on his palm with a ballpoint and goes walking. Record says the temp also worked at the impound lot 2 weeks, also at the county's abandoned property auction, also disappeared into Miami. Human lives are rain squalls here. They appear, soak, vanish. He makes a list anyway. Across the bridge, a TV crew shoots a stand-up at the marina. The reporter's hair suffers bravely. B-roll collects like tide water. Dock lines coiling. A fish leaping where the camera never is. Tourists licking ice cream that becomes metaphor. Closure, she says, face angled to catch the light, and the word lands on the water and sinks without bubbles. Her producer asks for one more take, slower, more solemn, and she gives them an ending that sounds like a funeral reading. The microphone breathes the ocean in and out. At sunset, the mother sits in a living room where the fan never stops turning, and the photographs of Alyssa occupy a shelf like saints. Candles would melt here. She doesn't light them. She listens to the verdict again on a tablet, the way some people rewind game-winning shots, and she lets the word guilty pass through her body like a soft wave. It does not knock her down. It does not set her free. Behind the audio, a muffled cough. Behind the cough, a whisper of paper. She thinks of shoes by the door. She thinks of the officer who promised to call if anything else surfaces. And she thinks of the line that all officers have, the line that divides promise from possibility. Night licks the island clean, and someone in a stilt house flips through channels until the news bloopers, a delicate mistake, a chyron misfires, and for a second the bar at the bottom reads, 1995 cold case solved, body recovered. It's wrong. The next second it's corrected. But wrong words, even briefly, drop roots in soft soil. The rumor starts like most rumors do, with a question asked at the exact right-wrong time. By morning, 3 boats are idling at the edge of a mangrove creek with and without permission, and men with tackle boxes swear they can smell something that isn't fish. A deputy arrives and scolds them with the tone of a middle school teacher, and the boats disperse like a scolded flock. The mangroves return to their patient breathing, the water slides into its daytime green, and the wrong word settles into a corner of the island's mind where later it will grow bones. In the jail, the man stares at a ceiling tile and counts the holes in the plaster. He tries to keep his thoughts in straight lines the way he used to keep spark plugs in rows in a tray. He inventories things he no longer touches, rope, a wrench, a smear of grease on the back of his hand, a filter with a gold ring. He inventories sounds he misses, prop wash, gull argument, outboard sputter becoming purr. He thinks of the cigarettes because he cannot help it. The memory drifts without him wanting it. The curb, the match striking, the way the morning after made the butt look like an artifact. He tells himself he threw them away. He tells himself he's a victim of other people's trash. He tells himself both things until they tangle. He asks for a lawyer again. He asks for a window. He gets neither. A local paper runs a Sunday feature. The thread that tied a ghost. A color photo of the machine. Lights like a nightclub for atoms. A scientist in a lab coat smiles as if she is being told a joke she has heard before and still likes. The article explains familial DNA like a recipe and ends with a flourish about justice catching up. In the letter section on Tuesday, there is a reply from a defense attorney on the mainland who has never set foot in the Keys and still knows everything. Slippery slope, privacy, retroactive fishing expedition. The emails that follow are a tide of capital letters. Science, in a place that worships weather, becomes weather. The younger detective takes an afternoon to drive up the chain of islands with the AC blowing and the radio low. He stops by the boatyard where the temp once worked, back when impounds filled with storm wreckage and everything smelled like moldy canvas and gasoline. The foreman remembers the temp only as a pair of hands that knew the difference between a nut and a bolt. He remembers he laid off half the crew after the storm money dried up. He remembers somebody, maybe the temp, maybe not, got fired for pocketing radios from glove compartments in cars that sat like aquariums with their windows open. He does not remember initials. He lights a cigarette and blows it toward the open bay, as if returning a favor to the past. That night, offshore, lightning makes a false noon above a black horizon line. A boat runs the reef line with its lights too bright. A captain shakes his head at amateurs. The storm misses the keys by miles, and still everyone sleeps the way you sleep, after an argument you didn't have. In the morning, the phone rings at the sheriff's office, and it's the lab again, the voice that sounds like measurements. We reran it, the voice says, because we rerun everything after a conviction as a matter of policy. It matches the same family cluster, sure. But also something else, a slight anomaly in one of the three butts, a chemical signature like a fingerprint inside a fingerprint. The adhesive on the filter shows a manufacturing lot not sold in Florida until September 1995. The detective stares at the calendar on the wall like it's suddenly in another language. Alyssa vanished in July. He goes quiet first, then he goes moving. He pulls the impound logs from that year, the shipping manifests for local stores, the cigarette distributors list. He calls the mother because you always tell the families about ripples before they feel the wave. She sits at her table and listens to the wind knock softly against the screen door and says, "So what does that mean?" He says, "It might mean the cigarette came from someone passing through, a tourist, a trucker, anyone whose glove box collected a pack from a different state and left traces on a curb 2 months earlier or later, or," he says this carefully, "it might mean the chain of custody on that particular butt has a wrinkle." She says the word wrinkle like it's a cut. He says he doesn't want to undo anything. He says he wants what she wants. She says what she wants is a steady answer, and he tells the truth. Answers don't do steady here. There's a bar at the end of a street that ends at Salt. If you open the back door, the breeze licks the floor. At that bar, a man in a faded fishing tee tells a woman with a braid-like rope that he remembers a skiff tied up where it shouldn't have been the week Alyssa vanished, no registration numbers on the bow, the kind of boat the law doesn't see unless the law wants to see it. He says he saw 2 men load something that sagged like wet canvas. He says one laughed the way boys laugh at the wrong time, head back, showing teeth. He never called because in '95 you didn't call with things like that. You let the tide carry it. The woman with the rope braid texts her cousin, who dates the younger detective's brother. The story finds him the way all real stories do, not by force, by drift. He goes to the bar and lets the man tell it again, slowly, with beer pauses. He doesn't push the parts that crumble. He holds the parts that hold, the weak, the tide, the dark skiff, the laugh. He asks about the men's faces and gets shapes, a hat, a jaw, a beard like bark. He asks about the motor and gets specifics, older Johnson, small, loud for its size. He asks about the moon and gets poetry, a coin you couldn't spend. He leaves with less than he wanted and more than he had and drives to the marina where the skiff would have slipped past, a place the cameras never shot because the angles aren't pretty, just old pilings and the smell of old decisions. By now the arrest has settled into the sediment of the island's social life. People use it as a way to measure time, before they got him, after they got him. The mother becomes a point on a quiet map. Strangers nod to her in supermarkets with a gravity that passes for respect. The dive instructor boyfriend from long ago, still teaching tourists with panic in their eyes how to breathe underwater, sees her once across a parking lot and stops so suddenly a golf cart honks at him. He thinks of the night they hauled him in and the lights and the questions and the way he sweat even though the room was cold and how for a second he thought he had done something because the room made him feel like anyone could have. He goes home and sits by the tank rack and lets all the hoses and regulators hiss like snakes and decides he will send her a note that says, "I'm glad you have an answer, even if it's not every answer." He writes it 3 times and throws it away 3 times. He keeps the 4th. The appeal arrives like mail always arrives here, hot, a little wrinkled, everyone knowing what's in everyone else's box. The defense file says new evidence, says chain of custody irregularity, says a single butt can tilt a verdict if the weight was on the knife edge already. The state braces like a boat tethered to a dock in a storm. Extra lines, fenders placed. On local radio, an old DJ with a voice like driftwood says, "We're not relitigating this in the morning hour, folks, but we can read your thoughts." The calls jam the line anyway. Justice is a story islands tell themselves, and they tell it different every year. And so the story keeps breathing. The younger detective keeps a copy of the chain of custody form under his blotter, not because he doubts everything, because he refuses to stop doubting anything. He starts running at dawn, past the mile markers that mark nothing but numbers and memory. He counts the steps between the diner exit and the place the footprint fades. He talks to the water under his breath like the mother does, and the water answers in wind. He watches the mangroves lift and lower, and he thinks of the skiff with the wrong registration and the laugh that did not fit the night. Somewhere offshore, a storm forms without asking permission, and the news gives it a name because everything needs a name to be real. The islanders tie down what they can and ignore what they cannot. In the back room of the sheriff's office, the box that has been lifted and set down for 3 decades sits one more night like a sleeping animal. The detective puts his hand on it, just a moment, a communion. Outside, the palms whisper secrets to each other. Inside, paper waits the way paper waits, patient as bone. The tape on the cigarette envelope holds. The old ink shines like fish scales when light hits it. And in the hush after verdicts, after headlines, before appeals, before storms, the case, solved and unsolved, closed in a jar, breathes in the same rhythm as the ocean it grew from, a rhythm people learn when they live here long enough and realize some songs never end, they just change key. The morning the appeal hits the docket, the sky pretends calm, a hard blue shell over water holding its breath. The younger detective is already at his desk, coffee cooling, blinds vibrating with the AC, the chain of custody photocopy square under his palm like a secret that chose him. He dials numbers until they connect into a voice with an inbox behind it. County HR, 1998 staffing, hurricane contracts, the paper trail of people who pass like weather. The temp's name is there, thin print, a start date, an end date, a phone that belonged to a trailer park that belongs now to weeds. He writes it all down as if ink can nail fog to a wall. Then he goes to the impound lot that used to be a field of flood-soaked cars and now is a fenced rectangle with a dog that does more sleeping than guarding. The clerk at the window remembers nothing and everything. She remembers a guy with a cap who borrowed a stapler and never brought it back. Remembers a week the air smelled like mildew and fear. Remembers a deputy who said the word evidence like a prayer and a dare. She points to a stack of old green ledgers bound with rubber bands as old as the case. He takes them into the shade and turns pages that stick like old promises. The temp's signature shows up in a loop that grows sloppy when the days get shorter. He finds a note on a Thursday. Sheriff's property, special handling. Initials he recognizes as not deputy initials. He copies that too. He returns the ledgers, thanks the dog. Back at the office, the state attorney's eyes are already salt bright. She's not new to appeal wins. She knows when to reef the sails. "We're solid," she says, half to him, half to herself, and taps her folder like a deck she's counting. The familial DNA is the mast. The cigarettes are the rigging. The timeline is the hull. She does not mention the adhesive anomaly because she doesn't like giving names to waves that might pass. He watches her leave with a stride that says she will not be boarded. Then he calls the lab again and asks them to teach him the cigarette the way a father teaches a kid the ocean, inch by inch, with respect, with fear. The lab tech has a laugh like a cough dressed up. She tells him how glue cures, how lots get stamped in tiny gray that vanishes under breath, how a production line hiccup can write its own little calendar. She explains how adhesive profiles can drift across state lines when trucks drive weird routes to save 10 minutes and $5. She says it could be nothing. She says it could be everything. He thanks her and stares at the photocopy until the letters look like waves. In the jail, the man watches the news through a scratched plexiglass window and sees his name like a buoy bobbing in a storm. He reads the crawl with lips moving because words slip when they're upside down on a TV mounted high. Appeal, new review, chain of custody. He grins without wanting to, and the grin looks like a wince. He sleeps that night with his hands folded like a plan under his head and dreams he is back on a dock where the fiber splinters grab skin and you don't mind. In the dream, a skiff with no numbers slides past and he can't tell if the men aboard are him split into two or two men who once wore his shape. The water is black. The laugh is wrong. He wakes with a taste of aluminum in his mouth and tells himself he will outlast the ocean because he has outlasted other things. The mother moves through the day like a person walking by a thin railing over deep water. She talks to the detective on the phone and hears the careful corners in his voice. She reads the appeal notice and folds it once, twice, 3 times, slips it under the tray of spoons because she can't throw it away and can't let it sit on top of the table like a dare. She goes to the diner where Alyssa counted tips and sits at the counter and orders coffee black, even though she takes it with milk because she wants the shock, wants the jolt, wants the proof that taste can change if it has to. The waitress is new, has eyes that don't know the story yet, and she chats about tourists and weather in a voice that hasn't learned the hush. The mother smiles and lets the chatter wash. She pays in cash and leaves a tip that is too big because some habits feel like prayers, and prayers feel like things that will learn to stand if you keep feeding them. Night rolls in slow, and the keys glow their string of necklace lights. At the bar, with the door to salt, the man with the memory of the skiff sits again, and the detective lets him talk again. But tonight, there's a new element. A fisherman with hands cut by line, who says he remembers the same week, remembers a rumor of a boat borrowed from a cousin of a cousin, remembers a motor that coughed like a smoker and a smell of bleach early in the morning where bleach doesn't belong. He doesn't have names. He has angles, tide direction, a moonset time scrawled in a logbook he still keeps. Personal, not for the state. The detective asks to see it. The fisherman hesitates like a man showing off a scar. He goes home and returns with a notebook soft as cloth. Entries like prayers, weather, fish, wind, luck. The week of the vanishing is there. He traced a circle around strange laughter near Mangrove Cut, 2 a.m. He underlined, "Don't go that way." He looks embarrassed, like he wrote feelings in a book meant for facts. The detective takes photos with his phone, light bouncing off ballpoint like scales. Appeal day. The courtroom smells like varnish and impatience. The man sits in a suit that fits like a borrowed story, his jaw clenched, gold ring cigarettes replaced by a paper cup of water he refuses. The state attorney stands at the lectern and assembles her machine out of sentences. The defense stands and dismantles it in a different order. Adhesive lot, temp handler, the eyebrow raise of one cigarette that should not have been born in July. The judge listens with a face that could be limestone. The mother sits in the second row and presses a thumbnail half-moon into her palm until it hurts the way she wants. Reporters do their best, respectful whisper dance. The younger detective sits behind the state attorney and takes notes that are less about what is said and more about where the words tug. He thinks of the bar notebook. He thinks of the ledger. He thinks of mangroves that don't answer questions and motors that do. A recess, then a return, then a ruling that is not a gavel smash rescue or a total wreck. The conviction stands. The court wants a hearing on the chain of custody to put a clean seal on the story. No one cheers. No one wails. The island continues its other life. Boat ramps, bait bins, sunburn, flip-flops slapping, but the pulse of the case keeps thudding under it all, a baseline you can't isolate but can't ignore. The defense declares a small victory. The state declares confidence. The mother walks out into sun that knocks at the eyes and tells herself to breathe until the world returns to its normal brightness. After, the detective sits with the state attorney in a room that has seen a lot of strategies. He lays out what he found, the temp's signatures, the impound lot note, the fisherman's notebook, the bar witness who cannot stop circling the laugh. The attorney drums fingers and then goes still. "We rehearse it until it sings," she says. "We patch the seam. We overprove the provenance of that envelope until a jury could eat off it." She assigns motions like lures she knows which fish will take. He nods. He leaves with a list that looks like a map. He's good at maps. He grew up in a place where every wrong turn was a dead end in water. He finds the temp, not a dramatic doorstep showdown, not a door kicked at dawn. Time did its job. The temp is older, softer, a man whose shoulder remembers lifting things that shouldn't be lifted by one person. He lives west of Miami in a house that used to be Orange Grove and is now rec room and lawn struggling with sand. He answers the door in socks and blinks like waking mid-afternoon. He doesn't deny the name. He doesn't deny the year. He denies remembering anything a lawyer would love or a prosecutor could hate. He says he carried boxes. He says he signed papers because that's what the job was. Sign here, here, initial there. He says he never touched anything without gloves because a guy got chewed out bad for that once and it stuck in his head. He says one night the power went out because every storm kills power, and he finished labeling under a flashlight that made the world look tin. The detective watches his hands as he talks. Does he make a circle in the air when he says envelope? Does he pinch imaginary tape? He sees nothing, which means everything. He thanks him and leaves, and in the car he writes one line in his notebook. Gloves are only as clean as the last thing they touched. He goes back to the cigarettes with a new hunger. He asks the lab about secondary transfer, about how a thing can drink the bark of another thing and keep it long enough to confuse a machine years later. The lab tech doesn't like the word confuse. She likes the phrase create a mixed signal. She shows him graphs turned into rainbows of lines and points at a specific gasp in the adhesive's profile that could belong to two lots, one summer, one fall, depending on humidity, on storage, on the way a pack lived in a glove box under a sun that turns plastic into paste. He writes it down. He thinks of curb heat radiating like an oven. He thinks of a butt soaked by a hose the morning after the search. He imagines time not as a straight line, but as moisture, seeping, blurring, drawing circles where detectives draw arrows. Meanwhile, the island runs its gossip patrol. Someone says the jailed man's cousin got asked for DNA because of a motorcycle stop, not a traffic infraction, and that changes contours. Someone else says a retired deputy had a crush on Alyssa, and that changes motives. Every new rumor is a razor and a lullaby. The detective doesn't chase them. He lets them settle in a layer, then stirs that layer only when something else points to the same spot. He returns to the skiff. He keeps returning. He sits on a dock at the wrong hour with a thermos and watches the mangrove cut the fisherman drew a circle around. He listens for a laugh that lives now only in retellings. He hears outboards, couple fights on speakerphone, music from a boat party that misunderstood distance, and then much later, the breath of a man rowing because his motor quit, the soft click of oars against a cheap plastic oarlock. He watches that shape move and thinks, if you wanted to disappear a thing, you'd choose this. You'd choose a night shallow and moon sketched. You'd choose a skiff that could slide where patrols didn't. You'd choose neighbors who thought they knew every sound and would therefore miss the one that mattered. The boyfriend writes the note. He leaves it at the diner in an envelope shaped like apology. The mother finds it next to the register under a magnet shaped like a dolphin and reads it at the counter with the same black coffee, and this time she tastes the milk she didn't pour in because grief is weird like that. She folds the note and puts it in her purse next to a coin she keeps for no reason and a key that no longer opens anything. She doesn't call him. She keeps the note like you keep a feather you find on a walk, proof of something that once moved through air with purpose. Weeks pass with the slow inevitability islands specialize in. The hearing date approaches like a tide you've checked on a chart. The state marshal's chain of custody witnesses like a parade of careful. The defense sharpens the story of a single weak link that could unspool the whole rope. The detective spends a night at his desk with the old envelope in a clear plastic coffin in front of him, not touching, only looking, and he thinks of how many hands did and didn't touch it, how many breaths went over it, how many times the room changed temperature and the room didn't care. He pictures July shaved into September by nothing more than a glove box and a sun, and the cruelty of math. He writes one more line. We're not here to save the past. We're here to measure it. Storm news again. Named, tracked, sworn at. Then the cone curves away at the last second as if it remembered a promise. The grocery shelves refill. The aluminum shutters unclick. The town exhales and laughs too loud at dumb jokes because they can. In that relief space, the detective gets a call from a name he doesn't recognize that turns into a voice he does. The retired deputy who kept quiet in the paper. He says he's been chewing on something. He says he's not a hero and doesn't want a camera. He says in '95 he took a statement from a deckhand who said a mechanic brought bleach to a boat at dawn and scrubbed the deck like it had insulted his mother. He says the deckhand was drunk when he said it, then sober when he recanted, and the statement went into a drawer that went into a box that went into a closet that later went into a storage room with a leak and a smell. He says he can't find it now. He says he's sorry. He gives a name. He gives a last known trailer pad. He gives a laugh that doesn't like itself. The detective drives there, 2 islands north, past a bait shop that changed hands and a stretch of road where pelicans draft trucks for fun. The pad is empty, a concrete rectangle with a memory of tire marks. He asks a neighbor whose yard is a gallery of faded plastic flamingos and gets a story about the deckhand who left, who came back, who left again, whose beard turned white and then turned not beard. The neighbor says the deckhand liked to talk when the bottle was low and kept quiet when it was full. The detective thanks the flamingos and leaves his card because you never know which lawn ornament listens. Back in the car, he says the deckhand's name out loud 5 times until it becomes a street, then a map, then a next destination. Night again, a different one, the color of nickel. The bar door to Salt hangs open on purpose. The fisherman's notebook stays in its drawer because he trusts the detective now. The newscaster's voice is soft on the TV because the sound is down, and the captions say hurricane that isn't coming. Traffic, that is. Art festival that will clog the same 3 streets and fill the same 3 parking lots, and then the crawl says hearing and chain of custody matter scheduled, and the bartender shakes her head like a dog shaking off rain. She tells a tourist to tip better because some places demand it by history. She looks at the detective and rolls her eyes with loyalty. He tips better. In the small hours, the detective dreams the envelope opens itself. The cigarettes slide out like fish and flop on the table. He wakes with the taste of paper in his mouth and laughs because the brain is a prankster when it's tired. He showers with the water on cold because heat feels like permission to slow down. He dresses and drives to the office where the cleaner hums and the lights buzz and the box that is not a box, that is a creature, waits. He puts his hand on the lid the way a priest touches a shoulder at a graveside. He does not pray. He bargains without words. He wants the adhesive anomaly to be a hiccup, not a hole. He wants the skiff to have a name. He wants the laugh to belong to a face he can put under a light. He wants the mother to move her shoes inside the closet one day and not feel like betrayal. He wants the ocean to return a single thing, just one that it took. He wants justice to hold the way a good knot holds. Tight, simple, no show. Outside, sunrise unzips the horizon. Boats choose directions. The island clears its throat and starts its day the way it always does. Loud, then low, then steady. And the case, solved on paper, unsettled in bone, keeps walking beside the detective like a shadow with its own weather, leaning into him when the wind changes, whispering headlines it wants and endings it refuses to accept. He keeps walking, he keeps listening, he keeps the envelope in sight and the skiff in mind, and he tells himself the truth he learned the first week he wore a badge. Sometimes closure is a door that swings in a storm. Sometimes you hold it. Sometimes you watch what blows through and start again. The day they swear in the chain of custody witnesses, clouds stack like boxes over the gulf, neat and heavy, waiting to be moved. The courtroom is an aquarium of quiet. Wood dark as wet docks, microphones slim as fishing rods, a row of faces trained to reveal nothing. The envelope sits in the center of the exhibit table under glass as if it were a rare shell. The judge's voice pours clockwork into the room. One by one they take the oath. Clerks and deputies, techs and temps turned permanent. Each voice a bead on a string the state attorney knots with patience. She builds the path the way you map a channel, marker to marker, never assuming the water between is safe. Hands gloved, signatures inked, numbers matching numbers like coordinates. The defense drifts behind, dropping buoys of doubt. The power outage, the impound lot chaos after the storm, the temp's initials that don't belong to a badge. When it's the younger detective's turn, he keeps his palms flat, 10 knuckles showing, a man who knows where he ends. He explains the ledger, the note that said special handling, the way the initials grew sloppy when days got short. He says sloppy is not sinister, it's human. And still, he looked. He admits the adhesive anomaly without flinching. He says anomaly like weather, not like guilt. He says he asked for more tests. He says the lab reran and reran until the numbers settled into a chant. He looks at the mother when he says reran. He looks at the envelope when he says settled. The defense leans into the anomaly like wind finding its funnel. If one butt might be September, not July, what does it do to the math, to the mast, to the rigging? The state replies with charts, with manufacturing lot drift, with the science of sticky things in hot cars. The judge listens with eyes that can calm a dog. He asks what you ask at sea. How confident are your bearings? What happens if the marker moved and you didn't notice? Who put it back? Who says it belongs there in the first place? In the rows, the mother counts the breaths between answers and imagines each one is a rope thrown from one deck to another in a chop. When the hearing adjourns, the corridor fills with the choreography of uncertainty, handshakes that aren't, nods that mean maybe, the clipped steps of people who will read the transcripts again tonight. Outside, thunder rehearses. The younger detective stands under the courthouse awning and chooses not to run for his car yet. He watches the first fat drops splatter like pennies. He thinks of the deckhand with the laugh memory attached to his name like barnacles he can't scrape off. He thinks, if the chain holds, then the story holds. If the chain creaks, maybe the story holds anyway because boats float on more than one line. He finds the deckhand in a strip of down-at-heel apartments painted the colors of faded postcards. A dog watches with the solemnity of someone who knows which boots mean trouble. The deckhand is thinner than rumor, thicker than regret, his beard a white weather system, his eyes the green of water over seagrass. He's got a cigarette that pretends to be unlit and fingers that remember rope, even when they hold nothing. He squints at the badge, then past it. He lets the detective talk because talking is a kind of tide. He corrects details the detective hasn't gotten wrong yet because that's his way of owning the story. He says he never told anybody anything he didn't believe, and he doesn't believe the same things every day. When the bleach comes up, he behaves like a man asked the name of a fish he filleted blind. I smelled it, he says, and the room fills with the ghost of it. Chemical thunder. Dawn. A boat that didn't belong where it belonged. A mechanic on paper and captain by habit on deck with a bucket and a brush, scrubbing hard enough to change the memory of the wood. The deckhand was there because he slept where he worked back then, on benches that taught his bones to curve. He says he told a deputy in 95 and told himself to shut up in 96. He says he drank a little in both years. We scrub everything, he adds, like a defense and a confession. The detective asks what the man looked like and gets weather again. A jaw like a sandbar, a way of standing that said the water and he had a pact. The detective asks about a skiff with no numbers, and the deckhand's laugh comes uninvited and unwelcome, sharp like a bird's. He points a thumb toward the world and says, "You know how many boats in those cuts had numbers? You know how many were just names whispered to each other and a paint job from the last storm?" The detective leaves with less than he wants and more than he can ignore. He drives to the marina where the bleach story lives and walks the planks the way you walk a road where you once bled. The boards complain in a language he speaks. He looks at the slip the deckhand remembers and imagines the sound of brush on wood, the hiss, the slop, the rinse water running off like spilled memory. He imagines a man making himself a hero of cleanliness. He imagines another man watching, making himself a witness of nothing. The island's gossip engine kicks over in a storm's draft. A radio host invites a professor from upstate to talk familial DNA and gets a master class and a call-in complaining about parking. A letter to the editor uses the word witch hunt and another uses the word saint. A tourist snaps a selfie with the diner's neon and captures the mother behind the counter by accident, and the photo grows likes like sea grapes. Comments stack, prayers, theories, the inevitable doubter. The line between empathy and appetite thins to a thread. The lab calls with a new angle, the way lightning finds the one ungrounded thing. The tech has a voice like a metronome that learned to flirt. She says they found a micro-abrasion pattern on 2 of the 3 filters that match the mouthfeel of the gold ring brand. Tiny ridges like a secret fingerprint. And on the 3rd, a slightly different pattern, as if a different mouth with a different habit pressed the paper. 2 smokers at 1 curb, 3 butts, 1 morning. The way stories split and cross like wakes. She's excited because science likes to whisper and be heard as thunder. He listens until the words become a tide map. Different habits, different mouths. He hears possibility not like a door opening, but like a room getting larger. He takes that largeness to the state attorney and lays it on her desk. She does not flinch. She pushes her glasses up in a motion you could time a heartbeat to and says, "We can live with that. We can live with 2. It doesn't unsettle the mast. It complicates the deck." Then she stares at the wall where a calendar hangs that forgot it was supposed to tell time and says, "We're not proving perfection. We're building a raft that floats." He nods. He tells her about the deckhand's bleach. She nods. She decides they need the deckhand even if he cracks like an old oar, because some testimony is not about the nail, it's about the boards. In the jail, the man learns to fold his days like paper boats. Sharp creases, careful symmetry, float them in the sink and watch them circle the drain until the water makes pulp of patience. He talks to his lawyer about adhesives and habits, and the word anomaly becomes a friend he hopes will get him through the door and a stranger he doesn't entirely trust. He replays the night again because there's nothing else to do. The curb, the match, the way heat rose from asphalt like a second air. He tells himself he was nowhere near. He tells himself the ocean would have kept him honest if he had been. He tells himself 2 different truths and is cramped with both. The mother takes the long walk that isn't long, just the difference between her front door and the road where the shoreline begins, and stops by the mile marker that has become an altar because someone always leaves a flower there, fake or real, plastic lasting longer in salt air. She touches the post with 2 fingers the way you calm a horse. She whispers one word she never says out loud to anyone. Where? A pelican drops to the water with a splash like punctuation. The horizon pretends not to hear. She turns back before the sun takes the day whole and passes the diner where a new girl with new eyes tapes up a flyer for a fundraiser unrelated to anything that matters, and the mother smiles and buys a slice of key lime anyway, as if sweetness is practice for mercy. The hearing resumes and the deckhand shuffles to the microphone like a man walking onto a boat not sure who's at the helm. The oath makes him straighten. The state guides him like a hand on the small of a back. Dawn, bleach, brush, hiss, rinse. He describes the smell and the courtroom flinches as one, memory by proxy. He describes the man as a silhouette against a brightening day, the kind of detail that keeps a defense lawyer awake for its imprecision. He claims regret, like lost tackle. He says he drank then and he drinks less now, and that's either evidence or poetry depending on which table you sit behind. The defense pounces, dates, faces. What if it was fish blood? What if it was fuel spill? What if bleach is just bleach in a place where fish and men stain everything? He takes the beating because he's taken others. He steps down and stares at his shoes like they're telling him a story he can't quite hear. The judge does not rule then. He gives the lawyers time to file thunder on paper. The island inhales and holds the breath. The detective chooses not to. He drives to a storage unit the retired deputy mentioned, a place where old cases go to dust with a lock that looks chewed. He signs the form and walks the rows, the metal doors groaning their metallic hymn. He finds the box the deputy swore once held the deckhand's 1995 statement. and opens it to find water stains like continents and files rescued sloppily after a leak. He sifts and sifts, paper soft as sea fans, folders that used to be manila and now are shore. He finds a single page with a title that doesn't match the contents, and under it, taped crooked with ancient Scotch tape, a smaller sheet, not the deckhand, a different witness whose name rings like a church bell underwater. Marina Clerk. The note is short. Saw her say no to a ride. Heard a laugh like someone who knew the punchline before the joke. Pick up with red tape tail, not sure which side. Smell of bleach next morning by slip 12. The tape lifts with a sigh. He photographs, he begs the copy machine not to jam. He tucks the original into a plastic sleeve with the tenderness usually reserved for newborns. He sits on the metal step in the storage hallway and lets the fluorescent hum fill his head until the refrain stops being, "You should have found this sooner," and becomes, "You found this now." Slip 12. He can find it on a map of the dark. He goes at dusk because dusk tells the truth here. Noon tells the lie. The marina is a museum of water noises, each one labeled if you've lived long enough. He finds slip 12 by muscle memory and stands where the clerk's eyes would have been if the clerk had been looking and not sweeping, hustling, living. He pictures Alyssa in the sodium vapor light, the pickup idling, the voice offering, the refusal because she trusted feet and lighted lines. He watches the shape of a laugh drift from a boat 2 slips down where 2 men rinse dive gear and argue about a fish that got away, and for a moment his skin remembers goose flesh. He follows the runoff channel from the slip down to the drain that carries yesterday into today and thinks of bleach cutting lines inside the pipes like it cuts smell from decks. He kneels and listens like you listen for a baby's breath. All he hears is water doing what water does. He gives the clerk's note to the state attorney and watches her face pull it into the machine of the case. "We don't need beautiful," she says, reading. "We need cumulative." She points to slip 12 like it's a word she can taste. "We need everyone to feel the layout in their bones." She flips the page and finds the corner of the old tape leaves a tacky ghost. "God bless tape," she says. "God bless people who never throw anything away." The defense files a motion to exclude. The judge rolls it in his hands like a marble and sets it down and says he'll hear it, but he's not in the business of erasing the past when the past is trying to speak. A date is set for arguments over a single sheet of paper, with a memory stuck to it, and somehow the island gets louder. Bands at the tiki bars, louder. Engines at the ramps, louder. The prayer in the mother's chest, louder. The fisherman with the notebook stops by the sheriff's office with a mango from his tree and a shy pride that his circle around the mangrove cut has value. The detective takes the mango like a communion wafer and puts it on his desk, and for an hour his office smells like sweetness and rain in a world that could be simpler. Night again. The hurricane that isn't coming flirts with a turn and then flattens out like a bad idea. A tourist loses a flip-flop to an incoming tide and roars laughter that the detective hears from a block away, and his shoulders climb before he tells them to drop. He stops by the diner because some nights require coffee even if sleep is a theory. The mother is there, closing. He tells her about the clerk's note and the way it confirms what the island already believed, and she nods like someone tracing the seam on a repaired dress. "I don't want more hurt," she says. He says, "I know." She says, "I don't want less truth." He says, "I know." They stand in the hum of refrigerators and neon and share a silence that isn't empty. She gives him a slice of pie like you hand a man a flare before he rows into dark. He says thank you and feels the word land. On the way home, he drives the bridge slow, the long one that pretends to be ground. In the rear view, the island is a string of lit beads. Ahead, the road narrows to that idea it always is here, a strip of certainty pressed between 2 enormous maybes. He thinks of the envelope, the cigarettes, the glue whispering its sticky calendar. He thinks of 2 smokers, 1 mouth, 2 mouths, a shared curb, a borrowed pack, a red tape taillight, a laugh. He thinks of the mechanic who swears he helped everyone, and the deckhand who swears he saw bleach, and the clerk who wrote a note that fell into a box, that fell into a leak, that fell into his hands like a second chance. He tells the windshield, which has heard confessions, that he believes in solved and in not solved, both at once, the way you believe in the sea and the sky even when they look the same. The wipers squeak once for emphasis, though the glass is dry. In the lane beside him, a truck with a repaired taillight passes, and his heart stutters, old animal, and then settles when the tape is the wrong shade. He laughs at himself without joy. The night opens, and the road threads it, and the case takes another breath in the dark, a long one, like someone recovering. The judge takes the motion under advisement, and the island goes back to pretending it can breathe. Noon crushes the docks flat. Gulls rehearse theft. The The water wears a color you can only call expensive. The younger detective walks the marina like it's text he needs to memorize. Slip 12, slip 12, slip 12. He says it under his breath until the number loses edges and becomes a place in the body. The clerk's note rides his pocket like a heat source. He thinks about the laugh that lived between a no to a ride and the sound of tires moving away. He thinks about bleach as a choice, not a chore. He ends up at the little store by the fuel dock, the one that sells bait, sunscreen, and the exact wrong snacks for people about to be sick on a boat. The owner has wrists like oars and memory like a drawer that sticks until you pull just right. Do you remember stocking this brand? The detective asks, holding up his phone with a label photo that looks like a warning in a lab. The owner squints, then smiles, not because he remembers the product, but because he remembers the truck driver who always asked for black coffee and left the hatch open once so a case of bleach fell and split its smell across the planks for a whole afternoon. 95, the owner says. Storm summer, we sold tons. People clean when they're scared. People clean after they're scared. He taps the photo. We switched to another brand in September. Distributor changed, cheaper by a nickel a jug. The detective writes the sentence down exactly, the way you write a quote you will fight to keep in court. He walks out into heat and feels that nickel like a pebble in his shoe, tiny, undeniable, shaping the step. September. Again, that shadow in the adhesive profile. Again, that whisper in the butt. He tells himself the truth that science told him. Supply chains blur, glove boxes bake, calendars smear. Still, the date sticks like wet paper to his skin. The mother finds a photograph in a box she hasn't opened in years, not because she was avoiding it, because grief hides its own doors. Alyssa at 18 at the shore, the water turning her legs into a mystery below the shin. On her wrist, a thin bracelet, cheap silver, a little conch charm that catches light like it's proud of being small. The mother pinches the photo between two fingers so she won't smudge it with the sweat the day insists on. She brings it to the sheriff's office in a manila envelope and hands it to the detective without speech. He knows language is for later. He studies the charm and feels a twin sensation. Hope so sharp it borders cruelty, and a doubt that saves him from announcing miracles. 30 years teaches you not to promise the tide will be in the same place when you look back. That night the moon bulges with intent. Perigee, a word the weather guys like to say slowly, and the tide sucks the flats hard until the mangrove knees show like knuckles. The fisherman with the notebook calls the detective the way a man calls when he knows a pattern better than a calendar. It'll be low, low at 4, he says. The cut I circled will show its teeth. The detective thanks him and pretends he would have known without the call. He sets the alarm for the hour that feels like a dare. He is up before it and out with coffee that tastes like duty. The cut gleams like a wound under a sterile light. Mud glistens, soft and treacherous, studded with shells that have economics no court understands. The mangroves whisper, a dry clatter, like gossip reduced to consonants. He steps where the fisherman points, tests each footprint like a lie detector, and lets his eyes go soft the way you do when looking for deer in brush. When he finds it, it's nothing, it's everything, a flick of unnatural straight in a kingdom of curve, a pale wink under a lace of roots. He kneels and the mud takes his weight with an obscene little sigh. He brushes with 2 fingers. With 2, not bone, not miracle, metal. A cheap jump ring joined to a shapeless lump by years of salt. He works it free the way you coax a splinter and holds a charm between thumb and forefinger that has forgotten it was a conch and wants to remember. He doesn't say the obvious word. He puts it in a vial like a priest saving a relic. He does not call the mother from the mud. He doesn't trust his heartbeat, his hands, the tide that already wants the evidence back. He walks the piece out of the mangroves like carrying a baby through a crowd, elbows up, protective. At the truck, he stares at it in the clearer light, and it resolves further. Conch, yes. Silver so cheap it has pitted into dull moons. A scratch across the whirl like a sentence that began and decided not to finish. He drives with the care of a man shepherding glass over a road of nails. At the office, gloves, camera, chain of custody initiated so aggressively it feels like theater. He writes, found at low, low tide, perigee moon, 04:13 a.m., mangrove cut south of slip 12, left bank. And it reads like a poem he did not intend to write. The lab receives the charm the way a museum receives a misdelivered masterpiece. Reverent, a little skeptical, immediately territorial. The tech, not the adhesive one, the metal one, says they can try for residues, for skin salts, for nothing anyone should hope for after decades of salt. She says they can compare tool marks on the jump ring to a pair of pliers if he gives them a pair of pliers. And he smiles because he loves that sentence. If you give us the right tool, we can show you the same hand touched both. He thinks of the mechanic. He thinks of the boatyard. He orders a warrant in his head before he has one on paper. He calls the mother then, because there are phone calls you do not delay and there are visits you cannot ambush. She comes in without the photograph because she doesn't need it anymore. She needs what is in the vial on the table. They do not open it. They look through plastic at an object that may be a piece of her daughter and may be a trick of the island, because the Keys love to dress coincidence in costume and send it to your door. The mother's hands make two fists that never lift, resting on the table like stones. If it's hers, she says, the water brought her home a little. The detective says, if it's hers, and he hears himself failing to keep his voice on the professional plane, landing instead in the air where people talk when they share weather. The warrant takes shape. The deckhand's bleach story, the clerk's slip 12 note, the familial DNA, the cigarettes, the adhesive profile explained and contained, the conch charm pulled from a cut you could hit with a cast from slip 12 if you had a wrist for it. The judge signs because even careful men get convinced by a chorus. The detective and a small team walk into the boatyard like they're visiting a past that never left. They head for the mechanic's old stall, now 2 tenants later, and ask permission because the paper says they don't need to, but the island says you always do. The tenant shrugs and chews at a toothpick that has seen more stories than witnesses. They find the tool chest like a time capsule, brands that outlived their logos, sockets arranged by a man who loved order until he didn't. They collect pliers, 3 kinds, because they don't know which pair would tell the truth. They bag them. They pull up a floor mat and find a fossilized cigarette filter mashed into a groove. Bag that too because no habit ever really leaves. They lift the lid of an old 5-gallon bucket and breathe bleach that isn't there anymore, only the ghost of it. And the younger detective laughs once, ugly, at his own human weakness for the dramatic. He bags the bucket lid anyway because show him a lab that won't try. The jailed man hears footsteps and knows the feel of a search even from a mile away. He sees his lawyer whisper and knows warrants landed like pelicans. He thinks of the pliers he bought in a summer when money was a vintage concept and remembers using them to fix a hinge on a cooler, and remembers using them to crimp a lead on a long line, and tells himself he never used them on jewelry, not once, not even to help someone who asked nicely. He lies down on the bunk and stares at the underside of a bolt that holds the top bunk to the bottom and invents a story where that bolt loosens and the top bunk collapses and he sues and buys a house where the wind never smells like salt. He knows it's a bad story. He tells it anyway, for practice, for warmth. The lab runs the charm against each pair of pliers like it's a love story with 3 possible endings. Microscopes hum like insects that found a god. The tech calls and says, we have a suggestive correspondence. And the detective says, English, please. And she says, the tiny tooth pattern on the jump ring matches pair number 2 like a dance partner who knows the steps. Not absolute, but I'm going to say likely. He writes it with the little cautions the court needs and the big belief the mother deserves. The tech adds a coda, trace of paint microscopically adhered to the ring, a color that used to be the boatyard's gray, a fleck of a universe attaching itself to another with the stubbornness of barnacles. The defense says chain of custody hearing only. New evidence is theatrics. Slow your roll. The state says relevancy, proximity, pattern. We're not widening the channel. We're sounding it deeper. The judge schedules an afternoon to hear paint and pliers and small gods. The courtroom hosts the charm like a debutante, coy under plastic, older than its shape. The lab tech explains tool marks to a jury that isn't there. The judge lets himself be the jury, because sometimes that's what the job is. The defense suggests 1,000 pliers, 1,000 jump rings, 1,000 charmed girls in 1,000 summer towns. The state suggests 1 marina, 1 cut, 1 man, 1 habit of scrubbing at dawn. The mother sits with her hands flat this time. The fist decided to rest. The boyfriend from then slides into the last row and leaves as soon as the charm goes back into its vial, because that's as much as his heart can take in air. The deckhand sends a text with a single word, sorry, and the detective doesn't reply because sometimes forgiveness needs an object and they don't have one yet, not even a bone, only a circle of metal and a cluster of stories. Thunder threatens again and does nothing the way some men threaten and do nothing until a minute that matters. The island does what it does, applauds at sunset, drinks at dark, prays without kneeling. The detective drives the bridge home with the radio off and the window down, letting warm air slap him awake. He inventories what the case is now. A solved thing by verdict, an unsettled thing by conscience, a cigarette with 2 mouths, a glue that whispers months, a bleach story with witnesses, a slip number like a rune, a charm that is either a message or a coincidence the size of a scream. He tells himself, and means it, that multiplicity is not failure. In places like this, truth arrives like boats, singly sometimes, often in flotillas, occasionally wrecked on the way. He stops halfway across the water where you can pull off if you know the cut in the guardrail that looks like a mistake. He stands in the night blown soft by the ocean and listens. There it is again, the low note under everything, the ocean's unending vowel. He imagines Alyssa hearing it that last night and trusting its sameness. He imagines a laugh that was wrong, not because laughter is a crime, but because it burrowed into the silence after her no, like a nail. He closes his eyes and lets the sound lift the hair on his arms. He opens them and drives on because there's a hearing tomorrow and files to prep, and a mother who will sit in the second row and turn her wrists up instinctively like a person expecting binders or blessings. In the jail, the man folds another paper boat and sets it in the sink. He watches it spin and thinks of a skiff that had no numbers, and a tide that had no mercy, and a morning that smelled like the idea of clean. He does not admit the boat to himself. He does not deny it. He holds both truths by their throats and tells them to be quiet because the guard is coming by and he wants to look asleep. In the dark, the paper boat sinks and rises, a thing that refuses to choose. The morning of the paint and pliers hearing arrives soft as a bruise. Heat hangs from the eaves. The courthouse AC fights a losing war. The charm sits under its plastic dome, a tiny moon trapped in weather. The younger detective feels that tug again, slip number in his bones, the cut like a mouth in the mangroves, the laugh shaped like an answer he refuses to settle for. The lab tech testifies with the patience of a metronome, micro ridges, transfer flex, likelihoods that stop just short of a swear. The defense breathes the words coincidence, contamination, common tool. The judge leans back and harvests silence like data. When the ruling comes, it's a sentence built with careful lumber, admissible for limited purpose. The jury in the original trial would have heard it if it had been found. The chain remains intact enough to carry weight. The conviction stands. The hearing has clarified the seam, not split the hull. The state attorney's shoulders drop, not relief exactly, a measured exhale. The defense files paperwork like depth charges that thud and sink. The mother sits without moving and then stands without drama, and in that tiny act, the room remembers why it should be quiet. Outside, thunder sketches a promise it once again doesn't keep. The detective walks the courthouse steps and lets the sun slap him back into the island's other reality. Bait prices, rental bikes, a wedding party spilling truth into the heat. He turns left, not right, without deciding. His feet are taking him to slip 12, the way hunger takes you to a kitchen. The marina is noon white, every surface a glare. He stands at the lip of the slip and counts to 30 because that is how long a person can hold a breath before a body complains. He pictures brush strokes at dawn and rinse water threading toward the drain, and he can almost smell bleach again. A ghost he's invited enough times that it shows up unannounced. He doesn't need a confession. He wants one anyway. He wants the story to say itself, clean, simple, one voice. The island laughs at him without malice. The island has never believed in single voices unless they're hurricanes. His phone rings. The lab that loves adhesive has news that isn't a thunderclap so much as a long roll. They've traced the odd chemical whisper in butt number 3, the maybe September one. Not just to a lot date, but to a distribution route that took a strange detour that summer, an out-of-state wholesaler filling a gap after a warehouse flood. The path touches Miami, brushes Homestead, then drifts down the chain of islands like a hand forgetting to lift. The tech's voice warms. It's still compatible with July if someone stored it wrong, but we also can't exclude a late August tourist. Mixed signal, she says. He thanks her and writes tourist with a question mark so big it looks like a hook on the page. Tourists leave everything behind. Hats, sunglasses, scents. Could they leave a cigarette at a curb that becomes a decade-long fuse? Yes, and also not like this, his gut says. This curb that morning. Those 3 in a paper envelope the island refused to throw away. He tucks the new doubt where he keeps them all. A pocket that doesn't leak. A place he checks before sleep. At the diner, the mother refills mugs without looking and thinks about the vial and evidence and the way the conch shape woke something in her that had slept to survive. She cleans as she always cleans, corners, edges, the undersides of things other people never see, because order is a way of declaring sovereignty over chaos. On her break, she goes to the payphone, no longer a payphone outside the bait shop, and touches its dead metal like a relic. Once, years ago, a man used this to call in a tip that proved nothing and somehow convinced her to keep breathing for another week. She does not call anyone. She lets memory ring and then hang up on its own. The deckhand appears again 2 nights later, not in court this time, but at the bar with the door that opens on salt. He looks younger by a year, as if telling the story peeled a layer of algae. He tells the detective something he forgot to be brave enough to remember. The man scrubbing at dawn, the mechanic, wasn't alone. Another silhouette, shorter, heavier through the middle, stood on the dock, smoking and flicking ash into the water with a rhythm that made the deckhand grind his teeth. "Flick, flick," he says, and does the motion with 2 fingers, and the detective feels a thread pull taut to the 2 mouths theory, the mixed signal in paper and glue. "Could you see his face?" the detective asks. The deckhand's laugh is a bird again. "Sun was behind them. All I saw was a hat," he says, and taps his head like he's knocking on a stubborn memory. The detective drives home in a storm that finally decides to arrive. Rain needles the windshield. The wipers do their frantic metronome. He thinks of hats and habits and how, in investigations and in marriages, cadence reveals more than declarations. Flick, flick. He says it aloud, and his mouth hates the sound. Morning clears with the shamelessness of the tropics. The boatyard opens its eyes and stretches. The detective goes back with a permission slip warrant to pull video from an ancient security recorder. The tenant insists never worked right. The tenant is not wrong. The footage is a procession of vague shapes arguing with static. But on a morning that matches the deckhand's memory by tide and light, there's grainy choreography. 2 silhouettes, one scrubbing, one on the dock for a while, then stepping away into a rectangle that could be the shadow of a truck bed. The second figure does a motion the camera barely understands, a hand to mouth, away, again, flick, flick. The detective freezes the frame and prints it and stares until pixels become prayer. He visits the shop that sells hats with fish on them because ridiculous ideas sometimes lay eggs and hatch. The owner, the kind of woman who knows which tourism logos have lawsuits attached, remembers a brand of cap the boat guys liked in the 90s. Thick bill, camo back, black front, a silhouette that ate more face than most. "There's a box in the back," she says, disappearing and returning with the carton archaeology always produces if you ask respectfully. He holds the cap in the fluorescent light and watches how it turns a wearer into a shadow. He buys it and feels foolish and delighted at the same time. The jailed man watches a documentary about waves and thinks the ocean has terrible PR. How it looks calm on TV while in real life it chews, fast and slow, until even stories lose their edges. He hears the rumble of a rolling cart and smells coffee and turns away from both because hope and caffeine are kin and both make the crash harder. His lawyer comes with updates shaped like 2 truths. The hearing didn't move the mountain. It did plant a flag for an appeal up the road. He says a second smoker might exist. He says that doesn't shave the state's beard enough to change the face. The man nods like a gator in sun and imagines pliers, a charm, a cut in roots, a laugh that was either his or wasn't. He cannot decide which lie makes the room cooler. The state attorney calls the detective into an office that smells like paper and lemons. She spins the printed silhouette across the desk and taps the flick-flick frame. 2. "We've always known it might be 2. She says, not afraid, not thrilled, appreciative of complication as a form of truth. "We need a name for the hat," she adds, and it's not a joke. Names tame weather. Names put hooks in fog. "Trucker," the detective offers. "Deck rat," she counters. "Visitor who wanted to be locals for one bad night," he says, and she writes visitor in block letters that look like they intend to file motions. The mother hears about the hat and doesn't care. Not that she doesn't understand the logic. She has learned the logic and the language and the equipment. She simply has finished building the room she can live in, and it has a verdict on one wall and a tide chart on the other, and a small shelf with a conch charm and a vial in the middle. She prays in neither direction. She sits very still until her body believes it is safe to chew and swallow. A fisherman phones in a memory so fresh it's suspicious. A pickup with a taped taillight, this again. Parked 2 slips down from 12 the week after the verdict. The detail lands like a gull on a rail, and the detective's instinct is to shoo it. Heat makes people see ghosts in reflective glass, but he drives anyway because discipline is faith enacted. He finds the pickup exactly where it should not be. Not the same truck, a cousin in species, newer, legal plates, red tape, a DIY flourish over a crack. The driver is a man with forearms like rumors and a polite smile. He swears he has never heard of Alyssa until last week's news taught him the story of the town he just moved to. His wife appears with a bag of ice and the exact right kind of confused. The detective lets the suspicion out of his jaw and writes a warning to himself. Stop marrying symbols to facts without paperwork. Night again. The fisherman with the notebook brings a map to the sheriff's office. Hand-drawn, tide wisdom inked into lines tourists would never understand. He puts it on the detective's desk like a blessing. If you left slip 12 and wanted no one to see you, he says, you'd cut here and here, stick to the shadow of this spoil island, wait for the breeze to carry your motor noise toward the highway instead of out to sea. And the routes are charcoal green on white. It's a path made of absence, the fisherman says, embarrassed at being lyrical. The detective traces it with a finger. If you wanted to move weight, a secret, a body. He stops his finger where the map marks deep enough to disappear. He hears the mother's single word in his head, where, and does not say it out loud because sometimes the air can't hold the weight. The court calendar rolls forward like a tide table, impersonal, precise. The defense files a motion to test the charm's metal for specific low-end alloy signatures that might match a kiosk vendor from the 90s. The state nods. The detective smiles despite himself. He remembers the vendor, a skinny man with a ponytail who called everyone Chief, and hammered initials into bracelets while teenagers pretended to be engaged. The vendor is gone, of course. But the mall above Key Largo still has a dent in its tile floor where his stool feet drilled tiny moons over the years. The detective goes, looks, laughs softly at the human tendency to believe where's proof. He asks around. He ends up in a back office with an old lease and a photocopy of a driver's license. Vendor's name, Kansas birth, a forwarding address that died a decade ago. He takes the copy like a postcard from a ghost. On his way back, he stops at an overlook where the ocean changes color for no reason you can see. He leans on the rail and reads the vendor's name aloud and feels nothing. He reads Alyssa's name and feels the air kneel. He reads the mechanic's name and the air resists, like a door stuck on a swollen frame. He reads the hatless nobody of the dock smoker. No name, just habit. And the air says flick flick in the rustle of palms. He is not a man who believes in signs. He believes in stubbornness that wears a badge and carries a pen. The lab finally calls with the metal story. The charm's alloy is a cheap cocktail of tin and something else the tech pronounces like a lullaby. Early 90s mall kiosk typical, she says. Nothing unique, nothing rare, everything and everywhere at once. The detective thanks her and doesn't write it down because some answers are only useful as reminders that magic doesn't do paperwork. The judge issues his final order on the chain of custody, affirmed, preserved, argued, but not broken. The island does not cheer. It nods. It adds the ruling to the invisible ledger it keeps of all storms that swerved and all nets that tore and all men who were and weren't what they seemed. The state attorney says thank you to a room that holds microphones and sighs. The defense says see you up the road. The mother goes home, opens the closet, and for the first time in years moves a pair of shoes from the mat by the door to a shelf. Not because she is closing anything, but because she is tired of tripping on the past. She sits down and waits for the guilt to come. It doesn't. She smiles without showing teeth. And the detective, he does the only thing that always worked. He goes back to the water. He stands at the mangrove cut at dusk, eyes soft, breath slow, listening for the single sound that doesn't belong. He hears gull complaint, outboard cough, human laughter in all its registers, good, bad, predatory, drunk. He hears the water's unending vowel. He remembers the hat, the flick, the way bleach turns a deck into an argument. He keeps watching, he keeps writing, he keeps saying slip 12 until it's not a number anymore, but a place in the body where you store faith you're embarrassed to admit you have. The case is solved enough to live with and unsolved enough to keep him walking. Somewhere out past the last lit dock, something moves under the surface and becomes the surface and is gone. He doesn't chase. He takes one step back from the mud, and another, because he will need dry ground for whatever the night decides to say next. The postcard weather returns like an alibi, hard blue and innocent, and the island pretends to forget, but the case hums under skin like a low-grade fever. The younger detective has developed a ritual that would embarrass him if he named it. He starts each morning not with coffee, but with the map the fisherman drew, tracing the route from slip 12 to the shadowed cut with a finger that no longer needs ink to remember. It centers him the way a captain finds north by habit. Then he reads the adhesive report again, as if new letters might grow in the margins overnight. Mixed signal, 2 mouths, 3 butts, a glue that tasted heat and kept a calendar of its suffering. He tucks the page away and steps into heat that won't negotiate. On Tuesday, he drives to Homestead because the adhesive whisper wouldn't stop saying the wholesaler detour out loud. The warehouse that once flooded is a self-storage labyrinth now, climate-controlled as a sales pitch. A manager with a haircut that never met wind hands him a stack of old invoices rescued from a paper purgatory in the back. He flips pages that smell like mildew trying to quit. There it is, August 95, a shortage, a Miami stopgap. Pallets of the Gold Ring brand shuffled south. No name attached to the last mile driver, only a truck number with a missing digit. He writes it anyway. He calls a man who knows a man at the department of We Keep Track of Wheels, and the favor costs him a weekend of teaching the man's kid to cast a net without snaring his own feet. He agrees before the man finishes asking. He returns to the marina at noon because he wants to hate it in its least forgiving light. The clerk who wrote the note, the one taped to the wrong report in the leaking storage room, is long gone from island life, but her replacement, years later, inherited the chair and the habit of watching. "You're the one who kept saying slip 12 until it started sounding like a prayer," she says, not unkind, and points at a calendar with fish drawn on the days that matter. She remembers a hat like the one he bought as a joke that turned into evidence of silhouette. She remembers a pair, always a pair, one doing, one watching. She remembers the second man walked with his feet turned out a little, a duck angle that made teenagers imitate him when he left, the way kids do when they've spotted a detail the adult world missed. The detective files it in the pocket where he keeps foolish-seeming things that turn into keys. At dusk, he goes to the bar with the door on salt and asks around for men who walk like cheap ballerinas. Half the place lifts a foot as a demonstration and laughs because laughing is the island's favorite life jacket. One man, a charter captain with a scar that starts at his ear and ends somewhere under his shirt, says he remembers a pair who fished the backcountry once, summer before the big storm that took everyone's porch chairs. One scrubbed the boat like it had offended God. One smoked and flicked ash with a pattern that would make a metronome jealous. He had that duck foot, the captain says, and does it, exaggerated, and then stills because he caught himself enjoying the theater. "I remember because I made a joke under my breath, and my mate couldn't stop laughing. I told him to shut up. Some laughs don't belong near water." He doesn't have a name. He has a photo on a wall of forgettable clients, all sunglasses and hats, which is to say, faces hiding in front of you. The detective leans in. Everyone looks like everyone until they don't. Back at the office, the appeal paperwork arranges itself into neat stacks that promise mess later. The state attorney sends a text. "Please don't go feral." He sends back a photo of the map with charcoal green lines and writes, "Feral is controlled." She doesn't answer because she knows the line between passion and recklessness better than anyone in the building. The mother drops by with a box of muffins she didn't bake because kindness and confection can be subcontracted. The box sits on the detective's desk like a small, bright thing that refuses to be ashamed among Manila. The mechanic's name still clanks when spoken. Jail hardens the syllables. The second silhouette has no shadow in the record. The detective makes a list of everyone who could be the hat. Deckhands who floated through, relatives who borrowed trucks with taped taillights, out-of-state visitors who pretended to be locals hard enough to pass for a night. He calls numbers on scraps of paper that crumble in his fingers. He leaves messages in voicemail boxes that still use couples' greetings from marriages that died 10 years ago. He hears Musack, weather reports, a child laughing in the background of a wrong number, and he jots duckfoot next to people who never knew they should notice how they stand. He goes to church on Sunday not for faith, though the room smells like cedar and forgiveness, but because the island attends in ways that make a policeman's ears useful. He stands at the back with the other men who lean. The pastor says storms pass, storms don't, and the room nods like boats. After, a woman with a jaw that has argued with life tells him her brother used to fish with a man who had to turn his feet out because his knees were bad from years on decks. He looked like he was always bracing, she says, and then remembers that she saw him once at the marina the week Alyssa vanished, and then remembers that memory is slippery and disrespectful and asks if she should have kept her mouth shut. "You did right," he says, which is true even when truth won't pay rent. The truck number with a missing digit becomes a real truck after a day of favors and a night of spreadsheets that make his eyes feel like a desert. The driver at the time was a man with a citation for illegal dumping 2 years later in a county upstate. The detective drives there because certain verbs only convert to answers at 65 miles an hour. The man is thicker than his records, tired in a way that suggests work, not workout. He remembers the flood, the detour, a week where bleach and cigarettes sold like mercy. He remembers the keys as a pay bump and a hangover. He says he has never heard of Alyssa while looking at the middle distance where guilt gathers when it's bored. The detective asks about a helper. He shrugs and says he always took a nephew on long runs. The nephew? A name, a last known in Hialeah, a picture on a refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a marlin, a hat pulled low. The detective writes it and thanks the marlin. He finds the nephew, not a door kick, a hey can we, a can I, a you remember. The nephew's feet announce him before his mouth does, turnout gait, a walk like he's on a dick engineered to betray him. The detective asks about 95, about a delivery to a marina that needed everything but forgiveness. about a night that isn't accusing him yet. The nephew glances at his uncle, at the floor, at the detective's shoes, and says he came down twice that summer, once in August, once in September, when the roads were a conveyor belt of fear and supplies. He says he unloaded bleach and paper towels and cigarettes by the box. And, yeah, he had a smoke on the dock because he smoked then and quit later and hates that he still wants one when he tells this. Flicked ash, the detective says, too quickly, and the nephew nods, guilty only of muscle memory. Like this? The detective does the obscene little motion with 2 fingers. The nephew flinches as if the air had asked him whose side he's on. I didn't do anything to that girl, he says, fierce in a way that suggests he believes himself. The detective believes the words and not their perimeter. He asks if the nephew remembers a mechanic scrubbing a deck at dawn. The nephew's face tightens into a shape beyond lying. Everyone scrubbed that summer, he says. Mold was a sacrament. In the jail, the man with the gold ring cigarettes hears footsteps and breathes in rhythm with them until they pass. He dreams of slip 12 without knowing the number, of brushstrokes at dawn, of a voice that wasn't his telling the water a joke as if the ocean could laugh. He wakes with the iron taste of a lie he's told so long it turned into weather. His lawyer brings him the nephew's name and he says it means nothing and writes it in the air with a finger anyway, like drawing a map he swears he's never sailed. The state attorney reads the nephew memo and looks at the detective the way a captain looks at a shoal. Interesting, dangerous, possibly useful if you know exactly how deep it is. He could be our second smoker, she says. He could be Noise. The detective nods. Noise is our weather, he says. Sometimes storms hide in it. She sighs in a way that says she's been alive long enough to know she's saying yes to more work. Get his DNA, she says. With a warrant if we have to, with a donut if we don't. They get his swab with neither fight nor pastry. The lab runs it against the familial cluster like a choir director checking harmony. The call comes at midnight because some music only plays then. Partial compatibility with the cluster. Of course, he's the uncle's blood. But nothing that moves the mast. The lab tech says the nephew's ash could have flavored the curb without changing the song. The detective thanks her and feels the weird relief of a suspicion that wants to remain smoke. 2 mouths, 3 butts. One of them may have belonged to a boy delivering bleach who didn't know he was stepping into the future with dirty shoes. The other? The mast says what it has always said. The rigging hums in agreement. The hull holds. The island takes this new sliver. Hialeah nephew, duckfoot, flick, and swallows it like a pill, chasing it with beer in plastic cups. The fisherman with the notebook draws a new circle on the map, a tiny suggested eddy where noise becomes current. The mother hears nephew and asks if that means anything that should trouble her sleep, and the detective says the only true thing. It means 2 people were at the curb where your daughter's night ended. One of them we've already put in a suit. The other let ash fall in the wrong place at the wrong time, and will carry that weight in ways we can't measure. She nods because she understands the units of invisible weight. A storm finally commits. It veers without flirting and hits 100 miles north, but the Keys get the skirts of it. Rain like glass beads, wind that pushes without breaking. The mangrove cut becomes a throat again, open, then clenched. Debris floats to places it avoided for years. After, the detective walks the rim of the cut because compulsion isn't a disorder here, it's a tool. He finds, half buried in new silt, a plastic charm from a kid's bracelet with a letter that is not Alyssa's, and a rusted screw that doesn't belong to any story he knows. He bags them because not belonging is a kind of clue. He watches a crab lift sand like a tiny backhoe and thinks of labor and futility and persistence that doesn't know its own name. He goes home and showers long enough to be scolded by the island's water table. He sits on his floor with the map spread like a ritual blanket and pushes muffin crumbs around with a finger. He says the names of everyone out loud. Alyssa, the mother, the mechanic, the nephew, the hat with no name, the deckhand who thinks he drank a memory into truth, the clerk who wrote slip 12 and slipped out of town and into legend. He says the word solved until it sounds like salt. He says the word missing until the room drops a degree. He lies down on the floor and listens to the ceiling fan cut air into measurable slices. He sleeps badly and wakes ready because that's the contract. Morning again, brazen and bright. The state attorney wants to close the book on the chain of custody chapter in a press conference designed to be boring. The microphones show up hungry anyway. She says the conviction stands. She says the hearing strengthened the spine. She thanks the lab as if it were a person. She pauses and, almost as an afterthought, says the investigation remains technically open for any further physical recovery related to the victim. Technically is the most honest word she speaks all week. The island hears it and understands what to do with maybe. The mother hears it and moves a photo frame half an inch on a shelf and doesn't know why her breath comes easier for a full minute. That night, the detective drives the bridge with the windows down and the radio off. His ritual is sacred as any saint's day. The ocean keeps its vow. He passes the pull-off and doesn't stop because stopping is for when a thing arrives. Tonight is for movement. He whispers slip 12 the way some people whisper grace. He pictures the conch charm turning in a current under a perigee moon until it chose to remember gravity and him at the exact same hour. He pictures the nephew's ash falling into the same square of curb where another man's gold ring filter landed 30 minutes later, 30 hours, who knows? Time gets drunk in heat. He pictures the laugh again, gnawing the dark. He does not imagine forgiveness. He does not imagine relief. He imagines persistence with a badge and a pen and shoes that know mud. He imagines tomorrow because that is the one gift the island gives if you don't insult it. Another chance to listen, another tide to search, another way to hear the same sound and decide it says something new. It begins with a porch light that never burns out, a rectangle of stubborn gold on a cul-de-sac, where the night keeps its secrets and the sprinklers hiss like snakes in the grass. One address, one date, 1998, California. Suburbia ironed flat, the kind of place where the loudest thing after 10 p.m. is the thud of a Sunday paper or a garage door groaning shut. Then a scream sliced that quiet into strips, a sprinting neighbor, a rotary phone jolted awake, sirens uncoiling through the dark like wire, and just like that, headline cadence, breaking news tempo, an ordinary street stepped into the glare and never stepped out again. She was 22 and chronicled in snapshots, a dented Polaroid clipped to a fridge, a university lanyard looped around a rear-view mirror, a ticket stub pressed inside a paperback that would never be returned to the library, missing by morning. Mystery disappearance, the anchor said. Shock to the community, the crawl insisted. Patrol cars idled, blue and red painting the stucco. The front door stood ajar like a question. A mug of tea cooled on a coaster that read, Home. The kettle had clicked off. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a life interrupted mid-routine, as if someone had pressed pause on a scene and walked off with the remote. Detectives moved in tight formation, the way storm clouds move over a field. Evidence bags swallowed small truths. A loose button, a hair snagged on a splinter, a soft smear on linoleum that could have been anything until the lab whispered otherwise. Reporters rehearsed their lines beside wind-bent hedges. Cold case in the making, an early headline teased. Neighbors offered the usual lines, those innocent hymns of suburbia. She was careful. She kept her porch light on. She never skipped trash day. She waved. But behind the windows, curtains fluttered with rumor. The city pretended to keep driving. The city kept looking back. In the days after, the narrative sprouted ribs. There was the late shift at the cafe on Foothill, the blue Saturn parked 2 feet too straight, the voicemail blinking one new message, then blinking nothing at all after the family played it, rewound it, played it again and again until the tape sounded like it was made of sand. A dog barked at 1:13 a.m., according to a man who never normally noticed dogs. A porch camera across the street, this was the 90s, grainy, a postage stamp of grayscale, caught a shadow that could have been a man, could have been a trick of the lawn, could have been the night proving it knows how to lie. The case learned to breathe without answers. Flyers curled on telephone poles and shed their staples. The mailbox filled with charity offers and crackpot maps. The family's front garden overflowered. Grief does that. It either kills everything or turns it wild. On anniversaries, the news came back, doing elegy as ritual. 5 years gone, 10 years gone, a countdown that never hit zero. The detectives aged into their suits. The file thickened. New officers inherited it, each believing they'd be the one to thread the needle. The public called it cursed. The parents called it unfinished. The internet, newly loud, called it everything. And then, years later, long after the porch light felt less like hope and more like a stubborn habit, the story didn't so much turn as tilt. A lab across the state upgraded its machines and invited dust to speak. One swab, archived in a box that had learned to be patient, went under the laser. The fluorescence hummed. Stripes of data resolved like music sheets nobody knew how to read back then, but now, suddenly, everyone did. A partial profile sharpened. A name didn't appear. Not a full one. Just a rhythm. Just enough to hum along to. Hit to a known offender, the internal memo said. Probable familial proximity, the scientist added, careful as a surgeon, blunt as winter. We have movement, the detective told the family, voice steady but eyes bright, as if steady were a costume he wore for them. Not an answer, he warned, but a door. The door swung on quiet hinges and opened into a map of faces, a tree with branches tangled by time. A certain surname hummed in the record like a low-grade fever. Brothers, cousins, a father who once worked swing shift at a plant that stank of solvents and lies, a nephew who moved out of state and kept changing his cell number, a divorce that turned ugly and left paperwork like glass shards. The past didn't just come back. It came back with a flashlight and a crowbar. They canvassed anew. "Do you remember him?" officers asked, pointing to a photo that kept emerging like a watermark from the edges of this case. "No," one neighbor said, and then, "Wait." Memory is unreliable, but it craves applause. Suddenly the cul-de-sac remembered a pickup that idled longer than most. A man who always parked under a dead street lamp. The way he watched the cafe door at closing time, pretending to read a newspaper he never turned. People swear they saw the future back when it was still the present. They didn't, but they recognized the echo now. More swabs, more envelopes, more signatures on consent forms. Doors opened reluctantly. Some refused, some bargained, some volunteered with the fervor of the innocent or the wishful or both. The lab spun its quiet spells, peaks on screens, ratios and likelihoods and p-values set like trap lines across a midnight field. "We're close," the detective said, but he didn't say it at a press conference. He said it in a hallway that smelled like toner and fatigue. He said it in the family's kitchen, where the corkboard was a calendar of sorrow and coffee lived on the burner like a permanent resident. News crews tuned their scanners. "Cold case thawing," the local affiliate teased. It felt tacky, because it was. It also felt accurate, which was worse. The streets tilted toward prophecy. The cafe's regulars spoke in headlines the way people do when a story grows teeth. A retired teacher brought in an old yearbook and tapped a face with a chewed pencil. "Him," she said, not knowing whether she was saving a life or smearing one. A private Facebook group grew by the hour, tags and theories blooming like algae. The detective, aware of all of it, chose the same two weapons he'd always had: patience and paper. They got their warrant on a Tuesday that showed up overcast, as if the sky didn't want to be accused of taking sides. A trash pull behind an apartment complex yielded a coffee cup, a greasy napkin, a cigarette stub even though the lease said no smoking. The lab put its ear to each item and listened. The result wasn't a drum roll, it was a match. Not a maybe, not a cousin of a maybe. A match that clanged through the hallway like a dropped wrench. "Arrest imminent," the email said, and then one word nobody wanted to say too loudly: solved. But to say solved is to pretend the math is kind. To say it is to ignore the way the human heart negotiates with time, because even as the cuffs clicked, even as the booking photo flattened a life into one feral frame, the story refused to sit still. The suspect had an alibi shaped like Swiss cheese, a patchwork of time cards, a roommate with selective memory, a cashier who remembered the hat but not the face. The timeline knit neatly in one section and unraveled in another. "Closed for public safety," the chief said on camera, jaw square, voice stiff. Off camera, the detective thumbed the edge of a photo and didn't look up for a long time. They walked the suspect back through 1998 using the interrogation room's fluorescent hum like a metronome. He said he didn't know her name. He said he was never on that street. He said his pickup was at the shop, then remembered the shop had closed in 2003. He said he was set up by people who didn't like him, a list that ran longer than he realized. He asked for a lawyer. He watched the red light on the wall, the tiny dot that means everything now. He started to talk again, small talk about baseball and traffic and how rent is robbery. He laughed at a joke and the room winced, the way laughter sounds when it's trying to be a key. Outside, a microphone orchard grew. "Community in shock," banners blared. The cafe changed its tip jar sign to read "Justice Fund," and the jar filled faster than the owner expected. Rage is generous when it needs to be. The family's porch light finally clicked off, then back on, as if it were rehearsing sleep and couldn't quite remember how. The cul-de-sac breathed for the first time in years, then held that breath again. Because the arrest was a headline, the rest was a novel, and the novel had too many pages missing. They found something in his storage unit. Of course, there was a storage unit. There always is in these stories. Corrugated metal and dust and the whirring insect choir of summer. Boxes labeled with years like tombstones. Tools that needed a better explanation than the one he gave. A stack of local newspapers the way obsessives keep trophies without admitting that's what they are. No smoking gun, not yet, but powder in the air, bitter on the tongue. The detective wore gloves the way a priest wears vestments. Reverence for the ritual, contempt for the reason it exists. The DA weighed the profile, the trash pull, the unit, the timeline that wobbled but didn't fall, and built a ladder out of it anyway. The community called it justice. The defense called it fantasy. The family called it a chance to sleep through the night without dreams that woke the house. And in the middle of it all, there sat the case file, fat and stubborn, waiting for its new label. Cold case, solved, a stamp that thunders when it hits paper, a stamp that sometimes lies. Because here's the detail that won't stop humming. the one that threads the needle from 1998 to right now and refuses to break. In the original scene, beside the kettle and the mug and the front door that stood ajar like a half-answered question, there was a note stuck to the fridge by a magnet shaped like the Golden Gate Bridge. 4 words, sharp pen, no smudges. Back soon, don't wait. Not her handwriting, the sister said. Not her shorthand, the mother insisted. Why write a note if the tea was still steaming? Why write a note if the car keys were still on the counter? If the shoes by the mat were the pair she never left without? The note is the grain of sand. The pearl or the blister grows around it depending on who you ask. The suspect's prints weren't on it. But there were prints, not his, not hers, not anybody in the house. Familial proximity, the lab had said. Close but not touching, a surname that hums, a tree with a missing branch. Solved is a generous word. It looks good in ink. It sells, it soothes, but it doesn't turn off the porch light. Not here, not yet. Not while the note still glints in the evidence sleeve like an eye that never blinks. Not while a second shadow crosses that grainy 1998 camera at 1:16 a.m. A sliver you only notice if you slow the footage and look at the edge of the frame where the night tries to hide. Not while the family keeps a chair at the kitchen table that nobody sits in because absence deserves a place to rest too. So call it solved if you must. Call it closure. Call it justice. Call it the end of the beginning. But listen to the street when it's quiet, and you'll hear the aftershock. A hinge creaking in an empty hallway. A radio left on low in a parked car. A kettle clicking off. A porch light insisting on its duty. The case file got a new stamp. The neighborhood didn't. And somewhere in the map of faces, a name is still humming, waiting for someone to follow the tune all the way home.